Tribalism, blood over truth, the clan trap. We began as circles around fires. Survival meant loyalty with teeth. Share meat, share danger, share enemies. In the beginning, tribalism is rational. The circle keeps you warm because the circle keeps you. But the fire that saves you also blinds you. You start to mistake heat for light. Tribalism is the ethic that says the who comes before the what. Who said it? One of us or one of them? Who suffered? One of us or one of them? Who broke the rule? One of us or one of them? The facts don't change, only the verdict does. Loyalty becomes a lens that warps reality until truth itself is accused of treason. At its core, tribalism is a hierarchy of value built from proximity. Blood, surname, team, flag, congregation, party. The closer the sign, the higher the worth. It promises moral clarity. Your people are good, theirs are confused or corrupt. It promises meaning. Your story is the spine of history. It promises purpose. Defend the line, avenge the slight, keep the tally. And because sacrifice underwrites the promise, it feels sacred. People bleed for tribes. But sacrifice is not a proof of goodness, it is a proof of commitment. Commitment, unexamined, will burn sanctuaries as easily as it warms homes. Philosophically, tribalism shrinks universal ethics into positional ethics. If my brother lies, it's strategy. If yours tells the truth, it's propaganda. Justice becomes arithmetic. Count the surnames, not the evidence. The human being dissolves into uniform handle hashtag. The person vanishes behind the category, and categories breed permissions that a conscience would never grant to a face. 3 pathologies grow naturally from this soil. Vendetta morality. Injuries inherit sons. A wound becomes a lineage. You are born with debts to avenge, like an ancestral mortgage of pain. The knife becomes a family heirloom. Forgiveness is preached as betrayal of the dead. What looks like courage is often choreography, rage memorized, passed down like a hymn. Centuries rot this way by calling memory justice and cruelty continuity, by confusing the refusal to forget with the ability to be fair. Purity tests. The tribe must know who is truly us. It invents rituals of allegiance, phrases you must speak, enemies you must denounce, indignations you must feel. Nuance looks like contamination, doubt smells like treason. Conversation collapses into call and response. You don't reason, you recite. You don't listen, you scan for shibboleths. The moral imagination shrinks until it can be worn like a badge. Knowledge captivity. Truth becomes a team sport. We cherry-pick facts that flatter us and exile those that don't. The scholar turns herald, the witness becomes a weapon. The questions we ask are engineered to guarantee the answers we prefer. Tribalism doesn't fear lies as much as it fears inconvenient truths, because lies can be rallied against, but an inconvenient truth threatens cohesion, and cohesion is sacred. Once loyalty is the supreme virtue, reality starts negotiating with loyalty. Evidence that harms the tribe is biased. Evidence that flatters it is clear. Censorship is baptized as protecting unity. Hypocrisy is renamed strategy. The mirror becomes a shield. Any reflection that wounds the image is smashed and then described as an attack by outsiders. A community that cannot endure self-critique is one that will not learn except from catastrophe. There is a difference, vital, often ignored, between community and tribe. Community is held together by concern for persons. Tribe, at its worst, is held together by hostility toward others. Community asks, what do we owe each other? Tribe asks, whom must we oppose to stay ourselves? Community enlarges the moral circle by welcoming the stranger as a potential neighbor. Tribe fortifies the circle by defining the stranger as a permanent threat. Community is a house built with doors. Tribe is a fortress perfected by the absence of them. The modern world has not outgrown tribalism. It has automated it. Algorithms learn what will feed our certainty and starve our curiosity. News becomes a jersey and commentary becomes a locker room. Sports rivalries teach political loyalties their moves. The platform rewards outrage with a standing ovation of clicks. Everything becomes a referendum on identity, so nothing can be discussed as a puzzle to be solved. We do not seek truth, we seek reinforcement. We do not correct each other, we perform for our own. 1,000 micro-tribes bloom, each with its own canon, devils, and rights, all convinced that the other side's certainty is the only certainty that is dangerous. Tribalism also colonizes institutions that pretend to be neutral. In corporations, the logo becomes a flag and quarterly goals a holy calendar. Dissent that questions the mission is not a culture fit. In universities, departments become micropolities, theories adopt zealots, and methodological disputes calcify into border wars where citations are passports and journals are customs checkpoints. Even charity can grow tribal teeth. Generosity becomes a moral billboard proving the goodness of the in-group, but the beneficiaries remain nameless, faceless, interchangeable, recipients of virtue signaling rather than neighbors in need. Underneath the rituals lives fear. That without a hard-edged identity, you are no one. That if you admit your own tribe's failures, you will be exiled. That if you open the circle, meaning will leak out. Fear makes cowards of truth and martyrs of slogans. Fear warns you that empathy is a Trojan horse, so you barricade the mind. But fear is a poor architect. It can build a bunker. It cannot build a future. Tribalism is also a prison for the self. When the who outranks the what, you mortgage your conscience to the group. You become fluent in double standards because a single standard would wound your loyalty. You learn to suppress second thoughts, to distrust your own eyes. You pledge fidelity to narratives that would crumble under the weight of a genuine question. It feels like belonging, but it is closer to dependency. Your identity is upheld by applause, and silence from your side sounds like abandonment. Ethically, tribalism throttles impartiality at the precise moment it is needed most. The stranger's suffering is discounted, the rival's innocence ignored, the ally's cruelty excused. Partiality has its place. Love rightly starts near. But when partiality becomes the only lens, justice is merely the arithmetic of advantage. In courts, this looks like juries that cannot see outside a uniform. In politics, it looks like policies that criminalize inconvenience. In families, it looks like secrets that metastasize into curses because the tribe cannot bear the shame of light. Consider the epistemic cost. A tribe that cannot hear unwelcome facts grows brittle. Its stories harden into porcelain, shiny, fragile, cherished. To protect them, you must carry them with white gloves and ban children from running nearby. But the world is not a museum. It is weather, erosion, fault lines, birth. The tribe that cannot risk revision will break at the first tremor and then call the earthquake an act of sabotage. There are, of course, gifts in the instinct that tribalism exaggerates. Warmth, accountability, shared memory, mutual aid. The failure is not love of one's own. The failure is idolizing one's own, turning the good of belonging into a God that demands offerings of honesty first. When the tribe becomes sacred, correction becomes blasphemy, and reconciliation a surrender. The altar demands your curiosity. It demands your capacity to see the neighbor as human when the neighbor wears the wrong colors. How is the spell broken? Not by self-loathing, not by cultural amnesia, not by dissolving into a formless cosmopolitan fog. The antidote is a higher, harder allegiance to principles that bind even when they bite. It means being able to tell your people, we were wrong, and remain your people. It means refusing the comfort of mirrored rooms and choosing the cold air of dialogue where other voices can actually alter you. It means practicing rituals that expand the circle, shared meals with those you distrust, joint projects where cooperation builds a new we, education that trains the imagination to inhabit the lives of strangers. It also means building institutions that honor loyalty without letting loyalty veto truth. Whistleblower protections are one such ritualized defiance of tribal reflex. Independent courts, free press, and academic freedom are others. These are not luxuries. They are the architecture of humility, that guardrails against our appetite to defend our own at any cost. A culture that funds and respects such guardrails announces that it prefers embarrassment today to disaster tomorrow. There is a personal discipline, too. Choosing questions that could actually hurt your viewpoint, tracking your anger to its source and asking whether it is guarding a wound or hiding a weakness, keeping a friend who is not of your tribe and granting them the right to tell you when you are being absurd. The point is not to erase loyalties, but to put them in their rightful order, beneath the demands of truth and the dignity of persons. If you want a test, here is one. When someone from your side commits the very act you denounce in your rivals, can you name it with the same word? If not, tribalism has already edited your dictionary. When an outsider suffers a loss identical to yours, does your heart react with the same pitch? If not, tribalism has tuned your empathy to a private frequency. When new facts arrive that complicate your favorite story, do you feel curiosity before you feel panic? If not, tribalism has mistaken certainty for safety and handed you the bill. The dream that tempts every tribe is innocence, that we are the victims of history and never its authors. But innocence is not a strategy, it is a fantasy that makes cruelty easy. Better is responsibility. We can be both harmed and harmful, both wronged and wrong. Responsibility invites repair. Innocence insists on revenge. The first builds, the second repeats. Tribalism promises safety. It delivers siege. It promises honor. It delivers heirs to a wound. It promises meaning. It delivers a script that cannot change its ending. The escape is not to have no circle, but to enlarge it until the fire gives light as well as heat. Let the we be large enough that truth can walk in without a password. Let the stories we tell about ourselves include chapters we would rather forget, so our children are not sentenced to reenact what we refused to name. Blood over truth is the oldest bargain in politics, religion, and family. It feels righteous because it feels warm. But warmth is not wisdom. The human task is to keep the fire and lose the blindness, to carry forward loyalty that kneels to conscience, pride that bows to evidence, memory that makes room for mercy. Only then does the circle become a community and the banner a symbol rather than a blindfold. Only then does belonging stop requiring enemies. And only then can we say that the tribe we love has learned to love the truth more. Feudalism, castles, chains, and the birth lottery. Feudalism begins with a promise, order in a violent world. When wolves circle the village and raiders own the roads, a fortress with a banner looks like salvation. You bend the knee, the Lord lifts the spear. Oath meets protection, grain meets levy, faith meets hierarchy. It feels ancient and stable because the story is simple, every person in a place, every duty bound to a face. But simplicity is the mask. Underneath, feudalism is a moral machine that translates accident of birth into destiny and calls the translation natural. The central claim is that security requires stratification. Land is life. Therefore, those who command land must command people. A chain of loyalty descends from crown to great lord to lesser lord to knight to peasant. In theory, each link protects the one below and obeys the one above. In practice, the chain tightens downward and slackens upward. When crops fail, dues do not. When war comes, conscription finds the poor first. Mutual obligation becomes a one-way street paved with sermons about duty. Feudalism's ethic isn't merely political, it is metaphysical. It interprets the world as a ladder crafted by providence. Some are born to pray, some to fight, many to toil. The philosophy behind the farm says justice is each station doing its appointed work. If you are crushed, perhaps you resent your role. The cure is piety and patience. This is the birth lottery sanctified, the accident of lineage recast as moral necessity. And because the story comes draped in ritual, oaths, heraldry, feast days, it feels noble even as it is narrow. It fails humanity in ways both obvious and subtle. 1. It funnels dignity through titles. Feudal order equates worth with rank. You are not a person who farms, you are a peasant, a legal species with fewer teeth on the law. Rights are permissions granted by a superiors, revocable when your obedience grows inconvenient. The human first becomes the role, then the resource. An entire vocabulary blooms to make this palatable: tenure, vassalage, boon work. But the plant's fruit is dependency masquerading as community. 2. It aestheticizes violence. Because protection is the product feudal lords sell, warfare becomes a profession wrapped in romance. Chivalry praises courage while laundering cruelty. A noble may burn fields and call it harrying, slaughter prisoners and call it custom, tax villages into famine and call it relief for the levy. The code polishes the blade, it does not dull it. Prose poems about honor replace prose accounts of suffering. 3. It freezes merit. When station outruns skill, institutions learn to kneel. Offices are inherited, not earned. Competence is an accident that occasionally visits the powerful. Innovation requires permission. Permission requires flattery. A society that thinks in bloodlines hoards stupidity at the top and brilliance at the bottom, then asks theology to explain the crux. 4. It privatizes the public. Roads, rivers, forests, mills, everything a people share becomes a lord's right. Common pasture turns into finable trespass, water into toll, marriage into fee, justice into a room in the castle. The sovereign function of law becomes a fief perk. In such a world, the common good is not a horizon, it is a portfolio. The poor learn to beg for exceptions to rules that exist to keep them poor. 5. It spiritualizes obedience. Feudalism needs priests. Its stability improves when inequality looks like cosmology. The sermon recasts oaths as sacraments and rank as ritual purity, framing revolt as sin against an ordained order. The tyrant borrows the language of providence and returns the favor with land. The result is a moral choke point, conscience checked at the chapel gate, liberation postponed to an afterlife that doesn't ask census questions. 6. It manufactures mutuality without reciprocity. The story of feudalism is mutual bonds. Lord protects, peasant provides. But the asymmetry is structural. The lord can shop for vassals, the peasant cannot shop for lords. Exit is treason when you are at the bottom and strategy when you are at the top. Contracts signed under necessity are not contracts. They are embargoes on hope. 7. It breeds hereditary fear. When tomorrow depends on one household's mood, you learn silence. Families teach their children not to be noticed. Talent hides. Courage becomes private. Generations grow out of that posture. The back stooped for harvest becomes the mind stooped for permission. Fear becomes custom, and custom becomes how we are. Feudalism also fails knowledge. A landholding aristocracy tends to confuse tradition with truth. The pace of change is set by the patience of the privileged. New tools threaten rents. New ideas threaten rights. Universities, where they exist, must flatter patrons. Guilds guard secrets as property. Books copy orthodoxy faster than they copy reality. The wheel turns, but the cart is heavy with precedent. We should not flatter ourselves that feudal logic vanished with the last manor. Its patterns reincarnate wherever birth, brand, or badge determines who is entitled to comfort and who is assigned to sacrifice. Consider corporate feudalism. Stock as land, C-suite as nobility, middle management as lesser lords, gig workers as peasants with phones instead of fields. Culture fit replaces bloodline as the filter for advancement. Non-competes serve as serfdom papers. Benefits are alms that can be withdrawn when the quarterly tithe to shareholders requires efficiencies. Loyalty flows upward in dashboards and downwards in pep talks. The crest is a logo, the oath is a mission statement, the levy is unpaid overtime with pizza. Or platform feudalism. The algorithm owns the road, the marketplace, the map. You rent visibility like a cottage and pay your dues in clicks. The community guidelines are the new forest law, opaque, selectively enforced, profitable to the owner. Peasantry upgrades to creators who own nothing but their hunger for reach. Lords settle disputes in closed chambers. Appeal is a support ticket. Then there is political patronage. The party as castle, the boss as lord, the faithful as retainers. Contracts and jobs flow through fealty. Competence arrives as a surprise. The public treasury becomes a larder. Opposition districts are starved to discipline their serfs. Elections replace dynastic succession only to install dynasties in everything but name. Even in the private sphere, feudal reflexes endure. Families treat daughters as dowries and sons as heirs. Honor killings pretend to be morality. Domestic tyranny wears the cloak of tradition. In clubs and schools, pedigree becomes a password that overwrites character. We talk about networks, but some networks are simply manners with better lighting. Why does the feudal pattern persist? Because it promises three powerful comforts. First, narrative simplicity. The world is legible when every person's place is labeled. Chaos is frightening. Hierarchy is a map. Second, personal security. Trading freedom for protection feels reasonable when danger is close. Third, moral outsourcing. Obedience relieves you from the ache of decision. If my role is set, my conscience can rest. The Lord decides, the priest absolves, the law confirms. The price of these comforts is adulthood. The receipt is history. The philosophical failure is the substitution of station for personhood. Feudalism argues that justice is everyone doing the duty of their station. But a just order is not an arrangement where duties are performed. It is one where duties are assigned in a way that respects persons as ends in themselves. If your station denies you standing, if you cannot appeal, refuse, exit, or speak without risking hunger, then the order may be calm, but it is not moral. Peace is not proof of justice. Sometimes it is the quiet of resignation. It is tempting to imagine benevolent feudalism as a counterexample. Kind lords, generous rents, festivals, the good old village. But benevolence that depends on mood is not justice. It is mercy performed as public relations. A system that requires saints to be tolerable is a system designed to fail the day after the saint dies. Every child born under benevolent feudalism still faces the birth lottery. Every talent still begs a gatekeeper's smile. What would it take to dethrone feudal logic where it lingers? Universal rights over particular favors. Replace permissions with petitions. If something can be withheld to enforce obedience, it is not a right, it is a leash. Law must be a ceiling over the strong and a floor under the weak, not a canopy the strong can move. Merit with mobility. Talent must be able to reach responsibility without a sponsor's bloodline or brand line. That requires transparent selection, open exams, antitrust against gatekeeping, and wages that do not require fealty for survival. Commons restored. The road, the network, the data, the water, these modern pastures must not be privatized into tolls. Where private ownership serves innovation, it should. Where it starves access, it should not. The point is not envy, it is agency. Exit as a right. No arrangement is just if it cannot be left without ruin. Non-competes that handcuff labor, debt structures that turn education into indenture, visa regimes that empower employers to own time, these are modern shackles with clean fonts. Culture of dissent with teeth. Oaths must never outrank truth. Whistleblowers protected, omerta punished, institutions designed for criticism from below. If the only safe speech is praise, you have a manor, not a republic. Feudalism claims to cherish loyalty, but loyalty worthy of human beings is not submission. It is devotion to a shared good larger than the power of one house. Loyalty worth having is loyalty that can say no without becoming treason. Feudal loyalty cannot survive that word because it is loyalty to persons before principles. That is why it breaks. When persons fail, the principles are not there to hold the world together. If you want to test for feudal residues in your own life, ask 3 questions. Who can say no to you without punishment? That reveals whether you are a lord in denial. To whom do you feel gratitude that is indistinguishable from fear? That reveals whether you are a vassal telling yourself stories. What could you not leave without losing the basics of dignity? Shelter, medicine, voice. That reveals the manners you inhabit while calling them markets, ministries, or families. The defense of feudalism is always memory, at least it kept the peace. But peace under a boot is the quiet of breath held too long. The defense is also romance, banners, halls, the pageantry of belonging. But pageantry is faith without examination, beautiful and blind. The modern task is not to sneer at ancestors. It is to refuse their excuses when those excuses become our policies. We honor them best by breaking the chains they did not see. Castles were technologies of fear. They promised security by concentrating it, the way a dam promises irrigation by controlling water. But a society cannot live forever downstream of a dam that never opens. The alternative is not anarchy, it is architecture. Institutions built to distribute power, not hoard it. Cultures that teach pride without pedigree, service without servility, excellence without entitlement. Feudalism turns the accident of birth into a verdict. The verdict sounds efficient. It is merely easy. Human flourishing requires harder handwriting, a script where birth matters only as a beginning, where oaths bind the strong to the weak with accountability, where loyalty is to the common good and not to the chandelier above the table. Until then, we will keep renaming manners, calling them networks, platforms, families, traditions, while the birth lottery deals its quiet rigged cards. Castles, chains, birth lottery, 3 nouns that once organized a continent and still haunt our maps. The remedy is slow and unglamorous. Law before lord, person before place, merit before memory, but it is the only remedy that treats humans as ends. Anything less is a clever renovation of an old house that was always too small for the dignity of those living inside. Divine right monarchy, crowned and never wrong. A single throat claims to speak for heaven, and the world is told to listen. Divine right monarchy is the political alchemy that turns accident into mandate, blood into law, and obedience into piety. It does not merely say that a king rules, it says a king is meant to rule, that his will is a moral weather, that to resist him is to foul the air breathed by angels. In this cosmology, the scepter conducts providence. The decree is not merely legal, it is liturgical. At first glance, the promise is seductive. Unity without faction, continuity without chaos, decision without delay. One will to steady many wills, one symbol to gather many loyalties. In a violent century, the crown is marketed as a peace treaty signed by heaven. But the treaty is written in a language that cancels dissent. When power is sacral, conscience is sacrilege. The crown pledges order and charges the price to truth. The philosophical failure begins with a category error, confusing source with standard. Power's source, ancestry, conquest, anointment, says nothing about what power should do. Divine right theory hides that emptiness by importing a standard from above. God has willed this lineage. But even if the cosmos has an author, it does not follow that the author autographs every edict. A just order requires reasons that survive daylight. Reasons accessible to the governed, not secrets supervised by a court chaplain. Divine right monarchy replaces reasons with reverence. Reverence is a beautiful posture for worship and a disastrous method for policy. Its second error is theological in costume but political in bone. The king's two bodies, the man of flesh and the mystical body that never dies. When the mortal errs, the mystical remains pure. Therefore, loyalty is never wrong, only badly executed. The doctrine launders failure. Famines are rebranded as tests, defeats as punishments for disloyal subjects, cruelty as the surgeon's necessary cut. In such a theater, facts are props, and the only unforgivable sin is to step backstage. From these premises, predictable pathologies flower. 1. Obedience becomes virtue without object. In healthy ethics, obedience is judged by what it serves, the good, the true, the just. Under divine right, obedience is self-justifying. You bow because the crown is holy, and the crown is holy because you bow. The circle closes, and within it, people learn to use moral vocabulary as choreography. Courage becomes charging for the king, prudence waiting for the king, justice pleasing the king. The person disappears, only positions remain, sovereign and subject, command and compliance. 2. Conscience is outsourced to ritual. Oaths are elevated above arguments. Incense and anointing oil do the work that constitutions and courts should do. Ceremony becomes a device for manufacturing consent, not measuring it. The more elaborate the right, the safer the wrong. If you can drape a cruelty in enough brocade, it becomes spectacle. Once it is spectacle, it is hardly ever called cruelty again. 3. Truth is domesticated by the court. The sovereign needs tutors, but divine right courts need flatterers. News is curated upward. Dangers are phrased as compliments. The messenger is a career hazard. The mirror is a sycophant. Scholars are funded for glossing prophecies that keep the palace safe. Historians become eologists. Philosophers become apologists. Prophets are invited on condition they predict sunshine. 4. Violence is aestheticized. Because the sovereign's will is presented as moral weather, the storm it brings is described as cleansing. Wars are defenses of honor. Purges are policies of unity. Executions are necessary theaters of mercy. The spectacle of justice replaces the substance of it. Blood becomes a pigment in political painting. 5. Subjects are infantilized. A people told that providence flows through a family is a people trained to live as minors. Responsibility atrophies. Citizens practice dependency as a civic art. Let the king discern. Let the king decide. Let the king provide. In return, the crown practices guardianship as possession. The state becomes a household, and every adult is kept as a child, fed, frightened, grateful, silent. A divine right order can survive for centuries, not because it works, but because it structures memory. It writes its own explanations into the calendar. High holy days to celebrate victories, fast to sanctify defeats, anniversaries to canonize genealogies. The past is curated until it confirms the present. Catastrophes recede into parables about disobedient parliaments or treacherous vassals. Reforms are credited to royal wisdom alone. The people are allowed to feel pride, fear, and hunger. Never authorship. Even the virtues it cultivates are misdirected. Loyalty is trained to kneel to persons instead of principles, so the loyal become useful precisely when the principle is at stake. Piety is redirected from the weak to the powerful, so compassion climbs stairs and never returns. Unity is achieved by disciplining differences instead of harmonizing them, so the silence that results is not peace but pressure. Defenders of divine right often appeal to metaphysics. There must be a highest will. Every chain needs a first link. Without a sovereign at the summit, order decays. This argument confuses final authority with infallibility. A community does need decisive structures, but decisiveness requires accountability, or it degenerates into whim. The alternative to an unanswerable crown is not anarchy. It is an answerable executive, bounded by law, timed by elections, checked by peers, judged by independent institutions, and pierced, when necessary, by the conscience of ordinary people speaking in extraordinary moments. Consider the epistemic economy of a crown above question. Information is sculpted to match desire. If sovereign whim is a driver of policy, courtiers learn to engineer reality around whim. Metrics are massaged. Enemies discovered or invented to justify next season's theater. Successes declared by fireworks long before harvests confirm anything. In such an economy, competence is a risk. The candid expert is dangerous because truth endangers comfort. Over time, a palace that cannot hear honest counsel must listen to accidents instead: plague, drought, bankruptcy, mutiny. Physics takes the place of philosophy. Gravity disciplines what gratitude would not. Divine right monarchy also punishes virtue in the wrong place. The honest governor who tells the truth to the crown is exiled. The cautious general who refuses a foolish war is replaced by a braver fool. The priest who preaches limits is transferred to a parish without doors. As the feedback loops corrode, mediocrity is promoted for safety. A throne surrounded by men who never correct it is a ladder to a cliff. But the deepest failure is ontological. It assigns sacredness to lineage instead of life. If human dignity is universal, then no office may claim divinity as private property. A legitimate authority may be honored, yes, but never deified. The moment a crown is worshipped, humans are ripe for sacrifice. If history shows anything, it is that gods with addresses are expensive neighbors. You can see the afterimages in modern life. The rhetoric is secularized, the choreography modern, but the grammar is the same. Cult of personality politics. The leader's name eclipses the platform. Criticism is apostasy. Photos substitute for policy. Dynastic democracy. Ballots count, but surnames matter more. Offices are inherited by media muscle and donor memory. Corporate monarchy. The founder becomes a prophet. Boardrooms applaud vision while compliance departments launder fallout. Dissenters are not aligned with the mission until the market delivers a revelation the altar could not. These are not merely analogies, they are mutations. The divine has been traded for the inevitable. There is no alternative, a slogan every bit as metaphysical as God wills it. The logic is the same. Neutralize critique by invoking a sky higher than reason. Providence then, market now, algorithm tomorrow. What counters a crown's certainty? Institutions that enthrone limits. Not limits as humiliation, but as design. Constitutions that place the crown under text. Courts that can say no without kneeling afterward. Legislatures that can consent to be led and refuse to be owned. A press that can offend yesterday's hero without begging for bread. Civil society thick enough that power must politely navigate instead of merely command. And beyond institutions, citizens with adult consciences. People who understand that reverence is owed to the human, not to the office. That obedience is moral only when the order is. That loyalty is a virtue only when it survives truth. The citizen's art is to honor service and deny worship, to thank leaders and limit them, to applaud ceremony and then ask for receipts. There's a spirituality compatible with politics, one that humbles rulers instead of haloing them. It teaches that authority is stewardship, not entitlement. That the image of God is carried by the least, not the seat. That confession is strength and infallibility a blasphemy. A king who believes this can be useful. A system that requires him to believe it and punishes him when he forgets is safer. Consider three concrete inversions divine right cannot tolerate. 1. Oath to law, not to person. Swear officers to a charter they can quote back to the throne. Make the text public, simple, and hard to amend in anger. Let the ceremony end with the phrase, even the king. It is a small sentence that rescues large lives. 2. Right of refusal. Build protected channels where a soldier, a civil servant, a scientist may lawfully dissent from unlawful orders. Make them dull and bureaucratic on purpose. Freedom loves paperwork when paperwork is what stops zeal. 3. Periodic disempowerment. Term limits, elections, mandatory audits, public debates where unscreened questions may arrive like weather. The crown must sometimes be made to argue without costume. If an idea cannot stand in plain clothes, it should not own a city. Skeptics will answer, but the world needs symbols. Indeed. Then appoint symbols that refuse to rule. Let art carry myth, not ministry. Let holidays sanctify gratitude, not genealogy. A symbol that never commands cannot injure you. A symbol that commands will eventually require your silence to stay beautiful. Divine right monarchy pretends to solve a deep human ache, the desire that someone wise and clean can make history gentle. The ache is honest. The answer is fantasy. There is no office on earth that can guarantee goodness by lineage, no oil that can turn a fallible will into a moral climate. Good government is not a crown placed on a head. It is a weight placed on a system, distributed, resisted, renewed. Crowned and never wrong is a promise that bankrupts the soul. It trains citizens to trade conscience for ceremony, intelligence for inheritance, responsibility for reverence. It calls this trade humility. It is only fear in formal wear. Better to accept the mess of answerable power than the beauty of an untouchable mistake. Better to live with leaders who can be told no than to die under leaders who never hear it. A crown can be a jewel or a blindfold. Where it is cherished as a jewel, it is kept in a case and worn on holidays. Where it is worn as a blindfold, a nation stumbles with confidence toward cliffs. If we must keep crowns, keep them glass, transparent, fragile, removable, and let the only thing we ever call divine in politics be the dignity that refuses to be sacrificed for the convenience of a throne. Theocracy. When God signs the laws, theocracy promises an end to the oldest argument in politics: who decides what is right? If truth can be legislated straight from heaven, the quarrels of men can be replaced by obedience to God. No more fragile compromises, no more cynical deals, only righteousness codified. In a frightened age, that promise feels like a shelter you can read aloud. Scripture as constitution, priest as interpreter, punishment as purification. But the same gesture that sacralizes law also disables conscience, because dissent becomes not an error, but a blasphemy, and power, clothed in piety, stops answering to the people it governs. Philosophically, theocracy commits a category error. It confuses revelation with jurisdiction. A claim may be true about the highest goods, yet it does not follow that those who speak for that claim should wield the sword. Knowledge of the good does not automatically confer the right to coerce it. Ethics without consent becomes engineering. Salvation becomes administration. A theocratic order treats spiritual authority as a license for temporal force, and once those wires are fused, both circuits burn. Politics loses its humility, faith loses its freedom. The next error is epistemic. Theocracy must convert interpretive questions into prosecutable answers. Sacred texts are deep, layered, and often paradoxical. Communities spend centuries arguing their meaning, but a state cannot function on footnotes and commentary. It needs verdicts. So ambiguity is resolved not by scholarship, but by decree. Hermeneutics becomes police work. A verse that once invited meditation becomes a checklist for raids. The result is not certainty. It is weaponized interpretation. The most aggressive readers win. From these premises, predictable pathologies grow. 1. Conscience is displaced by obedience. In healthy moral life, conscience is the inner court that can acquit you when the crowd condemns, or indict you when the crowd cheers. In theocracy, however, conscience is a duplicate office the state cannot control. It must be domesticated. The individual's duty shrinks to recognizing and repeating the authorized interpretation. I obey because it is right becomes, it is right because I obey. The derivative morality is neat, useful, and empty. 2. Dissent is rebranded as sacrilege. Ordinary disagreement becomes cosmic treason. To ask, is this just, becomes, are you insulting God? The move is rhetorically invincible because the answer the regime wants is already encoded in the accusation. Trials become liturgies with foregone conclusions. Martyrdom becomes an occupational hazard for journalists and the devout alike. When heresy and criticism are synonyms, the truth must either hide or die. 3. Compassion is inverted. In most religious traditions, mercy is central and authority is a means. Theocracy flips the ratio. Authority becomes the sacrament and mercy a discretionary exception, granted case by case to glorify the benevolence of the powerful. The widow's hunger is not a scandal, but an opportunity for alms. The system that produced her hunger is beyond question because it is haloed. Pity replaces justice. Reputation replaces repair. 4. Violence becomes pedagogy. Punishment is framed as cleansing, terror as teaching. Executions are witness to holiness, amputations moral arithmetic, censorship guarding the flock. The spectacle of enforcement becomes a sermon, and the human body is turned into parchment for theology. There is no misrule so ugly that a theocracy cannot narrate it as love. 5. Knowledge is domesticated. Theocrats need engineers and doctors, so they cannot ban science. They can, however, cage it. Inquiry proceeds until it touches doctrine, then stops with a bow. The safest scholar is the one who proves previously decided truths. The most dangerous is the one who discovers an unwelcome fact. Over time, the state prefers bright minds that have learned how not to look in certain directions. Excellence survives as ritual. The living edge blunts. 6. Corruption hides in sacral language. Every regime produces vice, but theocracy gives vice the best camouflage, pious vocabulary. A favor becomes discernment, a purge discipline, a theft stewardship. Hypocrisy thrives where the costume is holiness. Scandal is not what is done, but that someone spoke of it. The mask never slips because the mask is called a face. 7. Minority souls become raw material. The temptation in a holy state is to treat dissent communities as laboratories for proving the doctrine's power. If they thrive under restrictions, their success credits the law. If they suffer, their pain advertises the wages of error. Either way, the person disappears into the experiment. The state cannot lose when human beings are units of a morality play. The failure here is not religion itself. A society without transcendence sickens in other ways, turning pleasure into purpose, power into meaning, self into shrine. The failure is coercive sanctity, fusing the language of worship with the machinery of command so that disagreement feels like drought and punishment like rain. Faith is at its best when it speaks to power. It is at its worst when it becomes power. The prophets of every tradition knew this, which is why they spent so much time yelling at kings. A defender of theocracy may answer, but without sacred authority, relativism reigns. People do whatever they want. The good dissolves. This is a false binary. The alternative to theocracy is not moral anarchy. It is public reason shaped by moral depth. A pluralist polity can honor holy texts without deputizing priests. It can protect worship while refusing to police belief. Its laws aim at goods that most can recognize, life, liberty, fairness, while leaving space for many to live toward the highest good in their own language. The task is hard, but the ease of theocratic certainty is precisely its danger. Easy answers turn humans into subjects of a metaphysical bureaucracy. Theocracy also fails on its own terms because it treats faith as fragile. If you must jail blasphemers to keep God respected, your God is too small. If you must whip people into piety, you have admitted that love cannot persuade. A faith that cannot survive questions is a doctrine asking to be lied to. Over time, such faith hollows. Believers learn the choreography of reverence without the interior change. The state counts kneeling bodies and calls it devotion. Heaven counts something else. The modern world reproduces theocratic logic in secular garb. Parties treat platforms as scripture and leaders as living commentaries. Corporations devise values that function as commandments and excommunicate critics as not aligned. Ideologies baptize their vocabularies so that to mispronounce a slogan is to sin. The science replaces science. The market replaces national security, replaces actual security. These are not just metaphors. They are substituted sanctities, absolutes that inoculate policy against revision. Whenever a human system claims a sky that cannot be questioned, theocracy has set its tent. What would it look like to honor faith while refusing its capture of the state? Non-establishment and free exercise together. The state neither crowns a church nor hobbles it. Believers are full citizens with full rights to persuade. Unbelievers are equal citizens with full rights to ignore them. No ritual of office includes a creed. No creed gets policemen. Law in common speech. Write statutes and reasons accessible to those who do not share your theology. If a policy is just, it can be defended without a verse. Sacred motives may inspire public work. Sacred citations cannot substitute for arguments about effects. Institutional second thoughts. Courts that can say no to popular piety. Universities free to research results that upset Puritans and libertines alike. Media that can offend the devout without fear of being outlawed, and offend the secular without losing the right to publish. A society that builds room for heretics is one that trusts its truths to withstand weather. Protection for the devout against the devout. The first victims of theocracy are often dissidents within the faith. The wrong sect, the wrong reading, the wrong hymn. Design asylum within religious communities, ombuds, lay councils, external recourse, so that zeal does not eat its children. The health of a tradition is measured by how it treats its reformers. A civic liturgy of fallibility, term limits, audits, regular apologies, transparent corrections, ritualized public confession, not theater, but accounting. Make it ordinary for a state to say we were wrong without collapsing. Theocracy fears that sentence. A free people should practice it. There is an inner discipline as well. If you are religious, learn to hear the difference between what your faith commands you to do and what it allows you to ask of others by law. In private, you may bind yourself tighter than any statute. In public, you must persuade without the threat of jail. If you are secular, learn to distinguish between criticism of arguments and contempt for devotion. The latter breeds the very siege spirit that drives believers to crave a throne. How do you tell if theocratic logic is at work around you, no matter the brand? Ask 3 questions. First, can a citizen reject the state's sacred narrative and still be treated as fully loyal? If the answer is no, you live under a creed with cops. Second, are policies justified by effects or by appeals to an ultimate authority that cannot be cross-examined? If the latter, you are being governed by unanswerable sentences. Third, who is allowed to say, this hurts me without being told your pain offends God? If no one can, pain has been nationalized as propaganda. The seduction of theocracy endures because it offers the sweetest promise that goodness can be made easy by power. No more gray areas, no more long arguments into the night, just a glowing line between the righteous and the wrong. But humans do not become holy by decree. We become decent by practices that theocracy finds tedious, slow persuasion, patient listening, repeated revision, mercy that does not need a stage, justice that does not ask for incense. When God signs the laws, human beings stop signing their names to what they have done. Accountability evaporates into piety. Cruelty hides in the folds of robes. Love is conscripted as a slogan. Better to keep heaven high and law human, so that faith may remain free to judge the state, and the state remains small enough to be judged. A society that refuses to make gods out of its statutes leaves room for both repentance and repair. That society will still make mistakes, but its mistakes will be ours to own, not blasphemies to deny. TAC, Empire Imperialism, civilization at sword point. Empire sells itself as organization, railways, roads, codes of law, a lingua franca to make trade and treaties possible. It promises to stitch the world together so that famine shrinks, piracy fades, and savages wake into citizens under the sun of progress. But the needle is a bayonet and the thread is debt. At the core of imperial thinking is a flattering arithmetic. Your gain is a sign of your genius. Their loss is a sign of their lack. When this arithmetic governs, plunder gets renamed development and conquest performs as philanthropy. Imperialism begins with distance. The subjects are far away and distance is a solvent for conscience. A map shrinks lives into shapes. Once human beings become coastlines and colors, you can move them with a pencil. Cartography turns the world into a board. The board invites a game. The moral trick is simple. The closer you are to the cabinet and the ledger, the more abstract the blood becomes. You export order and import tribute, and the exchange looks clean because the stains dry before the goods arrive. Its central claim is a myth with 2 clauses. We bring civilization, and they asked for it with their chaos. The first clause baptizes the appropriation of land, labor, and law as a gift. The second clause accuses the conquered of inviting their own salvation by being unfit without it. This is the civilizing mission, an ethical costume tailored to fit every theft. It allows the conqueror to love his reflection while he breaks the mirror in another's house. Philosophically, imperialism commits 3 errors dressed as virtues. First, teleological arrogance, the belief that history moves in one direction, toward you. Under this belief, difference is not a rival wisdom. It is a stage of your own childhood. You don't meet another culture, you meet your own past and feel entitled to supervise it. What cannot be translated into your categories is dismissed as superstition or evidence of backwardness. The only tragedy that registers is lost profit. The only miracle that matters is the arrival of your machines. Second, moral outsourcing. You attribute every harm to intermediaries, local collaborators, Rival empires, the inertia of custom, so that the center stays innocent. Your ships bring guns, but war is tribal. Your taxes crush farmers, but drought is natural. Your police whip strikers, but the labor market is a law of nature. Imperial morality is a chain of denials that winds back to a crown or a boardroom that never ever meant this. Third, epistemic conquest. You do not merely take land and labor, you take the right to describe. Languages are demoted, archives are emptied, the past is rewritten to make your arrival look like dawn. Anthropology becomes an alibi generator, economics a doctrine that converts the seizure of resources into comparative advantage, theology a sermon that confuses providence with profit. When you control the nouns, you can do anything with the verbs. Out of these errors grow predictable pathologies. 1. Extraction disguised as exchange. Ports bloom, rails shine, customs houses sprout, and all of them point one way, outward. Wealth leaves faster than sermons arrive. The colony is an orchard owned by an appetite. Wages are calibrated to keep hands busy without enabling legs to walk away. When resistance rises, you call it banditry and insure it against investors' nerves with a gunboat. 2. Law as exception. Empire promises the rule of law and delivers a rule of exemptions. For the colonizer, due process. For the colonized, emergency powers. For your companies, charters. For their unions, batons. The legal code becomes a staircase, different steps for different feet. This isn't a failure of law, it is law designed to fail the equal. 3. Spectacles of justification. Schools, hospitals, rail depots, photographed, toured, praised. They do exist, that is the point. A few bright structures are built not as solutions, but as symbols, the way a tyrant keeps a poet on stipend to prove he loves beauty. The ledger tells the real story, who controls the mine, who prices the crop, who owns the ships, who writes the fines. Empire is generous with museums and frugal with wages. 4. Sanitized violence. Massacres become pacifications. Sieges become operations. Starvation becomes market correction. Language is chloroform. Once the verbs are softened, the dead look like a regrettable cost of doing the world's business. You publish a white paper and place a wreath. The foundation name for your family funds the next library while the province buries the next sons. 5. Manufactured consent. You never rule alone. You invent, elevate, or bribe a local elite that translates your interests into native accents. Collaboration earns decorations and, more importantly, deniability. The whip is held by a hand with the right skin. When rebellion comes, the first to be sacrificed are often these intermediaries. Proof, later, that they fight among themselves. 6. The colony inside the metropole. Everything you do abroad, you rehearse at home. You learn to police the poor as if they were an occupied district. You learn to treat immigrant neighborhoods as territories to be managed rather than communities to be served. The empire returns through the ports, in cuisine and in crackdowns. The habit of exceptional law abroad makes exceptions at home when the wealthy feel alarmed. Imperialism also fails itself. It promises stability and breeds blowback. Insurgencies, boycotts, drain on treasuries, humiliation at the hands of people who refuse to stay as statistics. It promises wealth and breeds dependency in the center. Industries addicted to cheap inputs. Politicians addicted to cheap patriotism. The imperial citizen is flattered into forgetting that the same state capable of starving a village to secure a price is capable of neglecting him when the numbers demand it. There are contemporary mutations. Flags are subtler. Logos do much of the work. The empire of the company charters supply chains instead of regiments. Debt imperialism replaces the gunboat. Loans engineered to fail arrive with conditions that sell the harbor, the power grid, the law. Structural adjustment is occupation by spreadsheet. Cut schools, sell water, pacify labor, and call it reforms. Data colonialism extracts behavior instead of rubber. Your attention is tapped like latex, refined into profiles, and sold back to you as personalization. The raw material is you, the assembly line is algorithmic, the plantation is your phone. Even humanitarianism can be annexed. A disaster invites cameras, cameras invite donors, donors invite contractors. The contractor's logo becomes a flag. The project plan arrives before the listening. The village is mapped into boxes, and the boxes improve the village until the funding cycle ends. Empire loves crises because crises make consent move faster. Urgency is the shortest road around dignity's demands. The ethical counterargument to empire is not nostalgia for isolation. The alternative is not romantic autarky, but reciprocity, exchange where both parties can say no, knowledge that travels in both directions, treaties that survive outside the colonizer's courtroom. Empire fails because it forbids symmetry. The bridge it builds is one way, and on the return lane it installs a toll. How does the imperial mind justify itself when the graves are visible? By story management. It celebrates explorers while burying porters. It tells of ship captains and forgets oarsmen. It makes the jungle a character and the people scenery. Art is hired to do the remembering incorrectly. Canvases of brave officers dying beautifully. Novels where locals have lines only when they praise or betray. Memory is curated until it produces gratitude. There is a psychological cost to the conqueror. The defense of theft requires a diet of lies. You must not only dominate others, you must reorganize your own perception so that domination looks like duty. You become allergic to ambiguity and confession. Pride turns into paranoia, because every mirror might be a ledger. The empire's subject loses land. The empire's citizen loses honesty. Eventually, the empire loses wars, and the citizen learns to call it overstretch, a technical term for the moral fact that some people refuse to stay objects. What does repair even mean? It is easier to say what it does not mean. It does not mean charity that returns pennies while defending the principle of the theft. It does not mean apology performed as theater while contracts remain binding. It does not mean diversity at the gala while pipelines stay locked by the same four firms. Repair would look like this: land returned where stolen, patents loosened when they laundered biopiracy, debt canceled where the original loan bought centuries of silence, archives opened, statues accompanied by plaques that tell the names of those under their shadows, curricula that teach power alongside poetry. And yet repair is only possible when two recognitions occur. The center must recognize that its prosperity is entangled with someone else's poverty, not metaphysically, but by invoice. The periphery must recognize that dignity cannot be outsourced to the conscience of those who profited. Dependence on their remorse becomes a new subjugation. The hard work is to build alliances that bypass the old gatekeepers, city to city, union to union, lab to lab, artist to artist, without waiting for imperial capitals to bless the connection. There is a personal discipline as well. Refuse to let admiration for accomplishments cancel scrutiny of costs. Railroads impress. Ask who was moved and who could no longer move. Museums amaze. Read the catalog for the word acquired and ask what it hides. A lingua franca simplifies. Keep the languages that carry lullabies and law. Do not be ashamed to enjoy what empire built. Be ashamed to enjoy it without accounting. Empire also fails because it misunderstands freedom. It believes freedom is the ability to reach. It forgets that freedom is also the ability to refuse reach. The right to be let alone is as holy as the right to be invited in. Empire trains a people to be offended by borders they did not draw. Maturity is learning to be instructed by borders you did not choose. Some gardens do not want your irrigation. Some mountains do not want your tunnels. Some souls do not want your schools. Civilization is not a kit you install. It is a conversation you are invited to join. If you need a test for imperial reflex in your own institutions, try 3 questions. Who gets to define the problem? If the answer is always the funder, you are preparing a benevolent occupation. Who can veto your solution? If the answer is no one on the ground, you are planning an elegant coercion. Who owns the surplus when the project succeeds? If the answer is the usual names, your mission is an invoice disguised as a miracle. Empire thinks it is a plan. In truth, it is a habit, a reflex that moves toward control when curiosity would do, that reaches for ownership when partnership would suffice, that hears silence as consent because it never learned to listen to anything but applause. Habits can be broken. They are broken by boredom with old victories, by shame that survives PR, by admiration that chooses to be taught. They are broken when strong men agree to be guests and not hosts, when clever men agree to be students and not trainers, when wealthy men agree to be taxed and not thanked. Civilization at sword point is not civilization. It is a costume for fear. The fear is simple, that without empire, you will be ordinary. The secret is simpler. Ordinary is the only honest greatness. Work that does not require flattery to justify itself. Exchange that does not require police to complete. Pride that does not need a parade to be real. The world will be stitched together, yes, but not by the threads of tribute. It will be stitched by agreements that survive when the bayonets are put away. An empire is a story that refuses revision. A just future is an anthology that invites it. Put down the map that turns people into pen strokes. Fold it. Walk without drawing lines. Listen without needing to rename. Trade without needing to own. This is how empire ends without merely changing flags, when civilization proves it can arrive without a sword and stay when the sword leaves. Aristocracy, oligarchy, the best because they said so. Aristocracy begins with a flattering premise. Let the best rule. Oligarchy trims the flattery and leaves the fact, the few will. Between them stretches a long corridor of excuses, pedigree as proof, fortune as fitness, familiarity as competence. In practice, the best is a biography written by the winners, the few is the number of chairs at the table. The claim is ancient and elastic. Some are born to prudence, some are tempered by wealth, some are trained by the right schools to hold the steering wheel without shaking. If you believe that, you will forgive a great deal of swerving. The philosophical error hides in a neat equivalence. Rank equals virtue, wealth equals wisdom, continuity equals competence. But rank is often accumulated deference, not moral clarity. Wealth measures leverage over markets, not lucidity about the human good. Continuity is sometimes only the ability to survive your own mistakes. When a society confuses these categories long enough, it builds an upper floor that believes the house would collapse without its weight. Aristocracy presents itself as stability with taste. The story goes like this. Broad publics are impulsive, experts are narrow. Only a cultivated class can see the horizon, bear the long view, and resist the angry winds of the street. The class just happens to look like the class already in charge. This is the first trick, selection masquerading as discovery. You curate a small circle and then marvel that wisdom concentrates in it. The second trick is virtue laundering. Traits that make money, risk appetite, daring, stubbornness, are post-dated as moral superiority. Success retroactively proves deserts, so deserts need no proof. Out of these convictions grow predictable pathologies. 1. Gatekeeping as public service. Every institution invents filters. Oligarchic culture treats filters like fences. The test becomes the talent. Credentials drift from signals to substitutes. Recommendation becomes passport. Pedigree becomes permission. The outcome is a workforce that knows how to resemble trust more than how to deserve it. You begin to hear a specific music in hiring rooms. Will they fit? Will they thrive in our culture? The answer means, will they predict our moves before we make them? Homogeneity is called cohesion. Deference is called maturity. 2. Law as moat, policy as portfolio defense. The few learn to write rules that look neutral and behave protective. Tax codes that praise investment, zoning that protects character, regulatory language that requires a lawyer to pronounce. The most elegant version is liability socialization. Privatize gains, securitize risk, ask the public to absorb the fall. After the rescue, the rescued warn about the moral hazard of helping the poor. 3. Information with altitude sickness. Elites do not merely hold money, they sit upstream of information. The news they consume is drafted for them. The data they see arrives clean by those paid to please. The feedback they get is filtered by careers afraid to end. Truth arrives wearing diplomacy. Over time, groupthink develops the cadence of reason. Same schools, same conferences, same metaphors, same enemies. Novelty is permitted, but only as ornament. The contrarian keynote sandwiched between cocktails. 4. Philanthropy as absolution. Gifts glow warmer than taxes. Naming rights feel better than redistribution. A wing is built, a scholarship endowed, a prize invented. And yet the ledger of structural unfairness remains. Charity is often sincere, sometimes beautiful, but it is frequently post hoc morality, returning slivers of surplus while defending the machine that minted it. The deeper the inequity, the larger the gala. 5. Mediocrity with manners. Oligarchies fear embarrassment more than failure. Thus, they promote the safe, the smooth, the loyal. Competence that threatens consensus is difficult. Genius without etiquette is not ready. You get organizations led by badge excellence, people who never make the catastrophic decision, but never make the necessary one either. When the world demands courage, you hear calendars shuffle. 6. Mobility converted into theater. A few dramatic ascents are curated to prove the latter exists. Cameras find the exception, and the exception is made into a brand. The millions who never felt the first rung are invisible. This is the mathematics of representational justice. Showcase upward tails to compensate for downward structures. The result is a public trained to mistake publicized anecdotes for statistics. 7. The iron law that smiles. Sociologists call it the iron law of oligarchy. Organizations drift toward rule by the few. The law does not need malice, it needs convenience. Decision-making is faster with fewer deciders. Information flows most easily to those already centered. Add prestige, add budget, add travel, and soon the core believes that deliberation equals delay, and delay equals danger. Let us handle it becomes the hymn of competence. Dissent is noise. The chorus grows expert at singing over it. Aristocracy insists that it protects the long term, but the long term is often the length of an endowment. Publics, by contrast, live in mortgage cycles, school years, harvests. The arrogance lies in imagining that horizons belong to those who don't have to meet rent. Actually, the long view is often clearest to those who endure the short view's consequences. The farmer can describe drought policy better than the columnist with a second home. The nurse can describe public health better than the panelist who phrases grief as externalities. There are modern mutations. Dynastic democracy. Ballots count, but surnames count more. Name recognition replaces arguments. Donor networks behave like bloodlines. The child of a governor arrives already convened. Elections legitimized inheritance. Inheritance shapes the election. The form is rotation. The substance is continuity. Critics call it a monarchy with polling places. Corporate patriciate. Boards recruit from boards. CEOs are minted in the same four forests. Compensation committees nod in unison. The market is said to discipline. In practice, it colludes. Pay for talent becomes pay for belonging to the pay club. The firm's conscience resides in a slide deck where externalities are adjectives and fines are line items. When scandal arrives, the circle commissions a report by a cousin circle. Technocratic oligarchy. Expertise is essential, but it can become a crown. Models and dashboards are treated like warrants to command. Inconvenient voices are dismissed as anecdata. The elite learns to say, follow the evidence, while choosing the evidence to follow. A polity begins to outsource judgment to a priesthood of probabilities that can be tuned with assumptions no voter sees. When those assumptions fail, the apology is written in passive voice. Platform sovereignty. A handful of firms own the roads of attention, the markets of speech, the stalls of commerce. Terms of service function as private constitutions. Enforcement is arbitrary but always rationalized. The owners speak as if they were reluctant emperors. We're merely hosts until the empire needs a purge. Citizens discover that due process is a help center. Extractor philanthropists. The fortune is made by engineering a choke point, patents, platforms, permits. Then a fraction is spent on saving the world from the problems the business model exacerbates. Moonshots replace mundane repair. The person who could fund boring fairness chooses exciting miracles and calls the choice visionary. What is the moral cost? Beyond inequalities numbers, debt ratios, Gini coefficients, there is deformation of judgment. The few begin to believe they are owed deference even from reality. The many begin to internalize that excellence involves proximity to the few. Children learn to dream of access, not contribution. Public debate becomes imitation theater. Audiences grade themselves on whether they clap at the right lines. People stop asking, is it true? And ask, does it track with the respectable? Respectability becomes the drag on reform. Aristocracy also erodes courage. If your continuation depends on the circle, you practice the art of never being first. You wait for cover, then step. When enough of a class behaves this way, necessary changes arrive only after the cliff. Whole cities are disrupted because those positioned to turn the wheel required an obituary to grant them permission. The obituary usually belongs to someone without a seatbelt. There is a defense worth answering. But the masses can be rash, the street can be cruel, the specialist knows what the public cannot. All true, in part. But the cure for rashness is not insulation, it is institutional friction, procedures that force experts to argue in daylight and force publics to hear the costs. The cure for cruelty is not hierarchy, it is law. The cure for ignorance is not contempt, it is education that treats citizens as protagonists, not clients. Oligarchy mistakes shelter for wisdom. Wisdom learns to live with weather. What then? corrects a rule of the few without romanticizing the rule of the crowd. Transparency with consequence. Publish contracts, meetings, lobbying logs, conflicts of interest, then give the public standing to act on what it sees. Sunlight without teeth is a tanning bed for villains. Antitrust of power, not only price. Break concentrations that warp the public sphere even when consumer prices look fine. Communications, data, finance. A monopoly over attention is a monopoly over the future tense. Sortition, where expertise tempts capture. Citizens' assemblies, juries for complex policy, randomly selected oversight boards, bodies that cannot be bought ahead of time because nobody knows who they will be. Pair them with expertise. Do not let expertise replace them. Open exams, open ladders. Replace fit with criteria. Replace sponsorship with auditable competitions. Ban the whisper network pass. The goal is not to humiliate elites, it is to make them less hereditary. Wealth with ballast. High progressive taxation on dynastic transfers. Public financing of campaigns, strict revolving door rules measured in years, not weekends. The point is not envy, but epistemic hygiene. People decide better when they're not auditioning. Codified right of refusal. Protect whistleblowers, create safe channels that do not end careers, punish retaliation as a crime against the institution, not merely against the person. Loyalty worth having survives truth. There is a civic art to teach alongside these structures. How to distinguish excellence from elevation. Excellence is serviceable skill married to humility. Elevation is position decorated with adjectives. Excellence invites audit. Elevation demands aura. A healthy polity honors the first and deromanticizes the second. That means learning to admire quietly. Less celebrity, more gratitude. Fewer profiles, more receipts. Oligarchic logic thrives on narrative control. It tells stories in which a handful of protagonists act and the rest keep score. The counter-story is not a morality play where the rich are villains and the poor saints. It is a story where role and worth part ways. Some of the few are brave, some of the many are cruel. But the rules must be written for tendencies, not exceptions. The tendency of concentrated power is to seek more of itself and to mistake its comfort for the common good. Write laws as if that will happen, because it has. A test for your own institutions. Who can say no to the important people without being exiled? How many decisions would change if names were hidden? What percentage of the budget is legible to the janitor who cleansed the building at night? If the answers are no one, not many, and almost none, you do not have a meritocracy. You have a salon that found a spreadsheet. The old defense of aristocracy is aesthetic, that refinement cultivates virtue, but refinement often perfects taste in excuses. Manners make cruelty patient. Diction makes plunder persuasive. The right wine pairs well with the wrong vote. The hard truth is that decency is not sophisticated. It looks like showing your math, paying what you owe, opening the door, hearing the person without a microphone as if the microphone were on. None of this requires a crest. The best is a meaningful phrase only if it can change reference. When newcomers can regularly become the best, and yesterday's best can be retired without apocalypse, you have a living order. When the same surnames answer to the same surnames, you have a hall of fame that never plays a game. Aristocracy's deepest failure is ontological. It treats station as identity. But identity large enough for a human must be portable. If who you are cannot survive losing what you own, you are not a person of standing. You are a costume with a nervous system. In the end, oligarchy promises grace under pressure and delivers pressure with grace notes. It promises stewardship and delivers management of appearances. It promises wisdom and delivers experience at maintaining advantage. The antidote is neither rage nor romance. It is adult supervision of ourselves and our structures. Adult supervision says, prove it, rotate it, publish it, cap it, audit it, share it. Then it says the most subversive sentence a culture of elevation can hear. Thank you for your service. Next. The best, because they said so, is a lullaby sung by comfortable throats. Wakefulness sounds different. It is awkward, procedural, sometimes boring, often slow. But it is the sound of a society remembering that excellence grows in many soils, that wisdom can wear cheap shoes, and that the common good is a table set for more than a few familiar names. Direct democracy, classical, when the crowd becomes a court. Democracy begins as a correction to obedience. No more decisions whispered behind curtains, no more fates signed by rings. Let the people speak, let power hear. Direct democracy takes that promise to its literal edge. No intermediaries, no filters, us deciding now. It feels like moral sunlight, but light without lenses blinds. When the crowd becomes a court, numbers pretend to be reasons, passion impersonates proof, and punishment can arrive faster than understanding. The ethical boast of direct rule is simple: legitimacy by head count. If enough of us say yes, the yes must be right, or at least rightful. But truth does not vote, and justice does not count hands. Majorities confer authority to act. They do not confer innocence upon the action. The deeper illusion is that 1,000,000 minds assembled in a square are wiser than 1,000 thinking apart. Sometimes they are. Often, they are merely louder. The classical model gives both warning and temptation. Athens birthed philosophy and tragedy, and in the same breath, the trial of Socrates and the intoxications of empire. Assembly, ostracism, instant policy, glories and grief in the same theater. The lesson is not that the people should be quiet, but that immediacy is not the same thing as insight. A city can think, it needs time to do it. From the premise, we decide directly, a family of pathologies grows. 1. The majority is whether or not will. Votes turn into barometric readings of mood. Today, fear, tomorrow, fury, next week, fatigue. Policy sways with pressure, not with proof. A referendum becomes a forecast you obey. Long projects, water, schools, emissions, demand patience. Immediacy grants mandates that expire with the next downpour. 2. The temptation of scapegoats. When something hurts and responsibility is diffuse, direct mechanisms offer a short path to catharsis. Name a culprit, pass a measure, banish a face. It feels like justice because it feels like relief. But relief is not repair. The accused becomes a container for our helplessness, a migrant, a banker, a heretic, a city, a generation. Punishment substitutes for problem solving. Applause substitutes for outcome. 3. Demagoguery as a workable business model. A system that rewards speed and certainty breeds suppliers of speed and certainty. The demagogue is an entrepreneur of emotion. He packages anxiety into purchase orders and sells the easy fix at scale. He arranges the crowd's feelings so that no sounds like betrayal and wait like treason. He is dangerous not because he lies, though he does, but because he tells a simpler truth than reality can honor. 4. Information cascades and performative courage. In crowds, silence is not neutral, it is interpreted. If you do not shout, you are assumed to oppose, therefore you shout. Opinions turn into costumes. People stop updating beliefs and start maintaining roles. An information cascade begins, the belief's persistence becomes its proof. Societies wake from such seasons asking, how did we all agree to that? The answer is that no one wanted to be alone on the square. 5. Responsibility diffusion. In a parliament, a vote attaches to a name. In a crowd, it attaches to a number. The greater the number, the easier the conscience. We all decided. The result is moral outsourcing in reverse. No king to blame, therefore no one. Harm floats, ownerless. The injured are told to respect the process that injured them. Process is not penance. 6. Complexity intolerant. Direct channels favor questions with sharp edges, but many necessary decisions are braided. Trade-offs, lagging indicators, probabilistic harms. The crowd's patience for footnotes is short. The footnotes contain the future. So complexity is flattened into slogans and pictures. Ban, build, exit, crack down. The verbs are strong. The consequences are stubborn. Policy becomes a series of dramatic gestures toward problems that require quiet work. 7. Tyranny of the majority. The ancient warning survives because the mechanism does. If enough of us want it, we can vote to trespass your dignity, your speech, your creed, your marriage, your body. A system that knows only more than half eventually discovers reasons to deactivate the humanity of the rest. The referendum can become a ritual of exclusion, public ceremony, sanctifying private fear. 8. Presentism, no brakes on now. Direct decision-making encourages present-tense governance. Pensions, reservoirs, biodiversity, bridges, everything boring and essential loses to everything immediate and intoxicating. A polity that decides like a teenager drives like one. Too fast, with music up, brakes late, convinced it is immortal until it isn't. 9. Spectacle as substitute. Participation is a good, televised participation is a drug. The vote becomes a festival. The festival needs drama, drama needs villains. Nuance ruins ratings. Now the square is a stage. Opponents are cast, not argued with. Outcomes are the third act, not the point. Policy is a photo taken from the right angle. The day after, the pothole remains. 10. Plebiscites as tools of the powerful. Irony. The strong love direct democracy when it helps them. Leaders launder pre-made decisions through the people's applause. Billionaires bankroll initiatives that look like citizens' will. Autocrats use referenda to claim a halo. A vote can be manipulated more cheaply than a legislature can be bribed, because you need only shape a season of feelings, not a chamber of minds. 11. Algorithmic mobs. Modern directness is digital. The square fits in the palm, the chant is a trending sound. Platforms maximize engagement by selling outrage back to its owners. Outrage is loud, so it looks like consensus. The timeline becomes a plebiscite that never ends, a jury without voir dire, a court with no appeal. Reputations are sentenced in hours, facts arrive days later to an empty room. 12. Devalued dissent. Once the people have spoken, those who disagree are sketched as enemies of the people. The space to be loyal and opposed shrinks, but systems that cannot bear dissent cannot self-correct. The most patriotic sentence, "we were wrong," becomes expensive to say. The second most patriotic sentence, "let's rethink," gets renamed betrayal. And yet, people must rule. The cure is not to put citizens back in their seats and return the microphone to a priesthood. The cure is to slow the crowd into a public and to surround moments of direct decision with structures that teach us to change our minds without humiliation. Designs that help crowds think, rights that cannot be voted away. Enshrine non-derogable protections for speech, due process, bodily autonomy, conscience, and equal protection. No referendum may trespass a person. A vote can allocate budgets, not worth. Double majorities and cooling off for structural changes, constitutional, territorial, civil rights affecting. Require a majority of voters in a majority of regions, and a second vote months later with the same threshold. Passion must survive the calendar to rule a calendar. Deliberative mini-publics, sortition. Before a referendum, convene a stratified random sample of citizens who hear adversarial briefings, examine evidence, question experts, and publish a balanced statement of agreed facts, competing values, and likely consequences. Let the crowd read the work of a public jury that had time to think. Pair ballots with booklets that are not propaganda. Fiscal and rights impact statements. Every initiative must ship with audited numbers, costs, trade-offs, who pays, who benefits, what risks, what rights are touched, and how mitigated. If a measure cannot bear a label, it should not be sold. Cooling words in the text. Ban slogans in ballot titles. Require neutral phrasing and 2 clear alternatives that a literate 15-year-old can parse the same way. Language is a voting machine. Rig it toward clarity. Sunset and review. Directly enacted laws should expire unless renewed after outcomes are measured. Attach mandatory after-action reports that enemies and proponents sign together. What worked, what didn't, what unintended harms. Supermajority for punishment, simple for mercy. If a direct vote carries criminal penalties or tightens them, raise the threshold. If it decriminalizes or reduces them, lower the bar. The crowd should struggle to punish and find it easy to release. Independent courts with courage. Judges must be able to say, this popular act is unlawful. Courts are not anti-democratic when they defend the democratic promise that persons are ends, not instruments of a passing mood. Campaign sunlight. Real-time transparent funding disclosures. Caps and parity in ad access. Public interest debates with equal time. Penalties for deepfakes and deceptive practices in the month before a vote. If persuasion is for sale, sovereignty is too. Civic literacy as infrastructure. Treat curricula on rhetoric, statistics, history of demagoguery, and media hygiene like roads and water. A crowd trained to smell manipulation is a crowd that requires better arguments. There is also a moral temperament to cultivate. Humility about partial knowledge. Ask, what do I not know that could reverse my view? If the answer is nothing, you are not thinking, you are rehearsing. Imagination across lines. Before you vote to govern a stranger, spend 5 minutes narrating their best case motive and worst case risk. If you cannot, you are about to legislate a caricature. Courage to be out of sync. The hardest civic bravery is not marching. It is standing still while your own side moves too fast. Practice the sentence, I agree with our ends and distrust this means. A habit of aftercare. Every victory that injures the dignity of the defeated is a down payment on the next emergency. Win like you intend to live with your neighbors. What about the oldest defense of directness? Representatives betray, intermediaries corrode the people's voice. True, often. But the antidote is not raw immediacy, it is better mediation. Representation is not a betrayal when it is accountable, rotating, transparent, and mixed with moments of direct say. Choice is not crowd or chamber. It is crowd plus chamber plus guardrails. The people speak, the text of the rights whispers back, the court checks, the jury of citizens clarifies, the legislature implements, the audit counts. That is the sound of a society trying to be wise rather than merely loud. A quick self-test for the health of your direct channels. Can a minority lose without being humiliated? Can a majority win without pretending to be holy? Can you change your mind without being branded traitor by your own side? If the answer is often no, your crowd is not a public yet. It is a court that never adjourns. Direct democracy is a beautiful impulse, to trust ourselves enough to decide our fate. It fails when we forget that deciding well takes time, facts, friction, and the dignity of those we disagree with. The square must remain a place for voices. It must not become a place for sentences. Let the people rule, slowly, visibly, revisably. Let numbers give permission, not absolution. Let passion light the way and procedure keep us from walking off cliffs we cannot see in the glare. Republic, mixed constitution, checks, balances, and IOUs. Republics promise grown-up politics, no crowns, no mobs, institutions that trade heat for light, separate powers so no single appetite can swallow the state, blend representation so no single faction can declare itself the nation, bind rulers to text, not to whim. It is a beautiful design, an architecture of doubt, but designs drift. Over time, checks become excuses, balances become bargains, and the citizen's voice is translated into a dialect understood best by donors, party whips, and lawyers. The Republic's dark side is not spectacle or sanctimony, it is plausible deniability, a system so divided that responsibility is a rumor and failure can always find a couch to sleep on. The philosophical boast is modest and therefore seductive. No one is infallible, so let no one rule alone. Yet, the devices invented to limit domination generate a new species of domination. Procedural power. Veto points multiply, calendars become weapons, interpretation outruns intention. A constitution meant to humble rulers begins to humble the public instead, teaching ordinary people that their demands must be fed through mazes whose exits are guarded by professionals. The Republic survives, the Republic's point often doesn't. 3 errors sit at the core of the mixed constitution when it forgets itself. First, procedure mistaken for virtue. Deliberation is good because it can improve judgment, not because it consumes time. But the habit of delay, the filibuster, the hold, the committee that studies the study acquires a moral halo. We are being careful becomes a port of call for cowards and rent seekers. The result is a politics that rewards those who can afford to wait. Incumbents, monopolies, the already comfortable. Urgency becomes populism's monopoly, and so urgency turns reckless. Second, representation mistaken for consent. Elections authorize, they do not absolve. Yet once a vote has been counted, 1,000 decisions are dressed in the costume of consent. Gerrymanders presented as geography, backroom compromises presented as prudence, lobbyist prose presented as law. You are told that you agreed because you participated. In truth, you agreed to be represented and were then converted into cover. Third, law mistaken for justice. Republics are proud of their texts, they should be. But text can be tuned. The same clauses that guard liberty can be read to guard privilege. The same rights that shield dissent can be wielded to shield dominance. Precedent becomes a sanctifier. A courtroom can slowly transform from the citizen's armor into the oligarch's instrument, not by conspiracy, but by deference to what the system already is. From these errors, predictable pathologies flower. 1. Vetocracy, rule by the power to say no. When multiple branches, chambers, and courts can block, the easiest politics is blockade. Status quo bias, once a safety feature, becomes a racket. Important but unglamorous work, housing, water, energy grids, public health, dies in committee while symbolic fights fatten careers. The minority that can coordinate across veto points often governs more than the majority that can only count votes. Number 2, parties as cartels. The Constitution balances institutions, parties balance ambition. Then parties become institutions. Ballots become brand extensions. Legislative calendars become campaign assets. Oversight becomes theater. The caucus room replaces the chamber. The donor retreat replaces the caucus room. Citizens vote for platforms and receive personalities. They vote for change and receive choreography. 3. Money as megaphone. Republics, wary of mobs, build channels that cost money to navigate. Media buys, legal compliance, consultants, polling, data. Speech is formally free. Amplification is not. The loudest sentences are those with the healthiest balance sheets. Influence is not purchased crudely, though sometimes it is. It is leased as access, expertise, stakeholder input. The invoice arrives as footnotes and favorable timing. 4. The map is manipulation. District lines convert populations into probabilities. Draw them cleverly enough, and a party can lose the popular vote while winning the chamber, lose cities while owning the countryside, lose credibility while keeping power. The people become packing material, clustered to waste their voice, split to thin it. When representation is engineered, resentment is too. 5. Courts as substitute parliaments. Legislatures polarize or stall, executives prefer action, the judiciary inherits the hottest questions. Over years, judges become the decisive authors of social policy. Sometimes this averts cruelty. Often it tempts a democracy to outsource courage. Law schools replace town halls, briefs replace arguments between neighbors. The republic still speaks, but now in a register that most cannot hear. 6. Emergency as habit. Mixed constitutions include escape valves, emergency powers, national security exceptions, executive discretion, so that storms don't sink the ship. But storms are redefined upward. The exception lengthens until it is the weather. War authorities migrate to domestic policy. Surveillance built for enemies glances at citizens. Agencies learn to govern by guidance because guidance struggles less than law in court. 7. Administrative drift. Complex societies require bureaucracies. They also require that bureaucracies answer to someone other than themselves. In practice, rules proliferate faster than accountability. Agencies, courts, and regulated industries form a triangle of negotiation where citizens are present mostly as data. Public comment is invited, then ignored. The real bargaining happens between office towers. The file is closed, pending litigation. 8. Debt as democracy's sleeping pill. Promises are cheaper on paper than in cash. Tomorrow's people do not vote today. So republics learn to govern by IOU. Debt is not evil, investment is real, but debt becomes a narcotic when it funds avoidance. Put off trade-offs, applaud today, invoice tomorrow. The republic grows a hidden constituency, those who profit when the bill grows and those who will never have to pay it. Number 9. Cynicism as civic mood. When outcomes diverge repeatedly from mandates, citizens stop believing the front door works. They seek windows, courts for everything, protests for everything, non-compliance for everything. This fuels the very dysfunction they hate and justifies the next round of only we can fix it charlatanery. The republic becomes a marriage where each spouse hires a lawyer before each conversation. 10. Ritualized accountability without consequence. Hearings are held, reports are written, findings are released, the calendar flips. In a monarchy, failure can be personal. In a republic, failure is distributed until it dissolves. Leaders learn to survive by apologizing in the conditional tense. The citizen learns that outrage is entertainment. Nothing is more demoralizing than transparency that doesn't matter. Notice the irony. The mixed constitution was designed to slow bad decisions, not to prevent decisions. When slowness becomes the point, the door opens for strongmen who promise velocity. I alone can cut through the mess, they say, and after enough years of mess, even decent people want the knife. The republic's pathology births its apparent cure. Still, the remedy is not to abolish checks, it is to aim them. The best republics make obstruction costly and decision-making visible. They force factions to bargain in public, tether money to disclosure and limits, marry representation to reality, and renew consent with generational maintenance of the constitutional machine. Correctives that make a republic answerable rather than merely complicated. Fair maps by independent hands. Redistricting by nonpartisan commissions with tight auditable criteria. Compactness, contiguity, respect for communities, anti-bias metrics, judicial review with timelines before elections, and public algorithmic proposals citizens can compare. If voters don't choose politicians, politicians will choose voters. Proportional or ranked voting. Winner take all amplifies tiny swings into earthquakes and wastes millions of ballots. Proportional systems translate votes into seats. Ranked systems force majorities to be built, not claimed. Either lowers the temperature and raises the accuracy of representation. Sunlight with teeth. Real-time campaign finance disclosure. Strict caps, public financing that offers competitive oxygen to challengers. Mandatory recusal rules for legislators on matters where donors are principal beneficiaries. Revolving door bans measured in years, not news cycles. If influence is speech, then equalize the microphones. Calendar reform. No secret holds. Limits on filibusters for ordinary legislation. Guaranteed floor votes for bills with cross-party sponsorship. Sunset clauses that force re-argument. Automatic scheduling for oversight triggered by spending thresholds. Procedure should slow stupidity, not bury accountability. Emergency breaks. Define emergencies narrowly, time limit them aggressively, require legislative renewals with rising thresholds, and attach automatic audits when they end. Make it a career hazard to keep the exception on life support. Administrative due process for citizens. Simplify, notice, and comment. Require agencies to publish why we didn't change our minds memos addressing the best criticisms. Strengthen inspector generals. Give citizen groups standing and resources to sue when agencies ghost them. Democracy includes the hours between elections. Civic juries for big bills. Randomly selected, demographically stratified panels that hear adversarial briefings and publish plain language findings on major legislation. Not a veto, an instruction manual for the public. Legislators can ignore them. Elections can then ignore those legislators. Budget honesty. No unfunded mandates, generational impact statements on debt, automatic counter-cyclical rules that save in booms and spend in busts unless overridden by supermajorities. Pension math that can't be hidden in footnotes. Politicians who sell IOUs should have to read the interest rate aloud. Constitutional maintenance. Periodic, structured opportunities for amendment, not chaotic conventions, but scheduled windows that require cross-regional supermajorities. A living society needs a living text. Otherwise, judges and improvisers do the rewriting. Beyond structure, there is a civic temperament republics must cultivate, or they become clever machines with sullen mechanics. Impatience with fog. Reward leaders who show their math, models, assumptions, trade-offs, over leaders who sell moods. Applaud when someone says, "I changed my mind because new facts arrived." Punish the press release that reads like perfume. Local pride without local capture. Subsidiarity, do it at the lowest level competent to do it, paired with enforcement that prevents small tyrannies. A republic that centralizes everything becomes brittle. One that devolves without guardrails becomes feudal by zip code. Affection for losers, not sentimentality, rights. Every electoral defeat should leave dignity intact. No gloating laws that punish the other half, no administrative retaliation dressed as policy. If losers expect humiliation, they will treat elections as do or die. That corrodes the whole. A culture of receipts. Make it ordinary for citizens to ask, what did that bill actually do a year later? And to change their votes accordingly. Parties should fear performance metrics. Donors should not be the only auditors that matter. What about the standard defense? Our system is messy because it protects liberty. It does, until mess becomes a moat for the already powerful. Liberty needs protection from the state and from concentrations outside it. A republic that cannot pass anti-corruption laws, cannot enforce antitrust, cannot build housing where jobs are, cannot keep water drinkable, cannot count ballots without theater. Such a republic protects liberty mostly for those who can buy alternatives. Private schools, private guards, private wells, private platforms. Everyone else gets slogans. There is a subtler danger, constitutional nostalgia, the worship of the founders, whoever they are in your country, as if their genius were a closed account. Gratitude is proper, idolatry isn't. A republic faithful to its founding spirit is one that renovates in public. It refuses to let yesterday's compromises become today's commandments. It understands that the point of checks and balances was to keep power from impersonating principle, not to keep principle from ever outrunning power. Personal tests for your own republican reflexes. When your side holds the gavel, do you still love restraints? When a court rules for your enemy, do you defend the court's independence? When a policy helps you and harms a neighbor who cannot plausibly be your rival, Do you call it incentive, or do you demand a redesign? If the answers are usually convenient, you are practicing team constitutionalism, the republic as a jersey. The mixed constitution was built to disappoint jerseys. At its best, the republic is a school for adulthood. It trains us to live with difference, to pursue justice without a sheriff's badge in our theology, to prefer accountable slowness to glamorous harm. At its worst, it is a labyrinth staffed by courtiers who rent the minotaur by the hour. The difference is not mysterious. Publish the maps, shorten the hallways, lock fewer doors, name the custodians, charge admission, not toll. Checks and balances are not a lullaby. They are an alarm clock. They wake us to the fact that no one, including us, should get their way without argument, receipts, and the possibility of losing. When the alarm becomes background noise, the republic naps through history and then wonders why it keeps waking up to fires. The cure is not caffeine in a can called the strong leader. The cure is to do the boring work loudly enough that boredom itself becomes a public good. Then the IOUs shrink, the excuses thin, and the phrase mixed constitution returns to meaning what it was supposed to. A people mature enough to mistrust themselves and wise enough to keep governing anyway. Liberal, representative democracy, rights without rights. Liberal democracy promises a simple, dignifying bargain. You keep your conscience, I keep mine. The state protects our basic liberties. We choose governments in public and replace them without blood. It is the most successful political invention of the last few centuries because it makes room for disagreement without requiring enemies. But the bargain is thin by design. If we leave it thin, rights on paper, elections on schedule, something hollow grows behind the slogans. People learn the language of liberty while living the habits of spectators. The dark side is this thinness. Rights without rights, claims without the common practices that make those claims real and shared. Its first philosophical error is to mistake non-interference for freedom. Negative liberty, freedom from coercion, is essential. Without it, everything else is theater. But if you cannot afford a lawyer, if your vote is functionally weaker than my funding, if your voice never travels where decisions are made, your freedom is formal. A society can remove shackles and still leave people standing on trapdoors. Freedom requires capability and power, not only permission, the means to use your rights without selling your hours or your honesty to do it. Second, liberal democracy often mistakes episodic consent for ongoing authorship. We vote in November and are governed in passive voice the rest of the year. In workplaces, on platforms, in landlord-tenant relationships, in the bureaucracies that surround our lives, decisions are made by charters and terms we did not write. A citizen on paper, a client in practice. The franchise cannot compensate for 1,000 daily dependencies where we are audience rather than agent. Third, it mistakes neutrality for emptiness. The state declines to enforce a single vision of the good. This is wise. But then public life declines to pursue any thick common life at all. The result is a marketplace of souls, pluralism without solidarity, rights without shared rituals, neighbors without a neighborhood. The flag waves. The calendar is hollow. People search for meaning in teams, brands, and grievances because the res publica, things we hold in common, has been budgeted into symbolism. Out of these errors come predictable pathologies. One, atomization disguised as autonomy. We praise independence while living in loneliness. Fewer associations that are not for profit, fewer unions, fewer clubs, fewer choirs and leagues. When solitude becomes our civic infrastructure, politics has to carry not only policy but also purpose. It cannot. The ballot is asked to heal what only belonging can. Two, money as the metronome of public speech. Formally, everyone may speak. Practically, amplification is rented. Campaigns, advocacy, and even grassroots movements learn the same lesson. The microphone belongs to whoever can keep the studio's lights on. Courts that treat money as speech make citizens into off-budget voters. You cast a ballot with your hand and another with your wallet. The second is audible year-round. 3. Rights as consumer options. Without civic rights, shared duties, public service, rituals of deliberation, rights shrink to choices. We curate identities, lifestyles, media diets. We opt in or unsubscribe from everything except consequences. Citizenship becomes a subscription. We can cancel emotionally when disappointed, and politics becomes customer support for our resentments. The question is no longer, what do we owe, but what did I order? 4. Legalism that replaces politics. Because procedures exist and rights have language, every conflict becomes a lawsuit. Courts become parliaments by other means. Lawyers become the nation's translators. Sometimes that saves minorities. Often it encourages elected officials to avoid hard arguments. Why write a persuading law when you can write a defensible brief? The people's will migrates into footnotes. Legitimacy migrates into technicalities. 5. Performative representation. Elections demand story. Governance demands structure. The incentives of permanent campaigning, fundraising, virality, imagecraft colonize daily work. The representative becomes a narrative manager, optimizing impressions rather than outcomes. Constituents receive newsletters and live streams. Potholes, schools, and clinics receive task forces. A politics built on performance slowly forgets how to perform work. 6. Media as mirror maze. A free press is oxygen, but the business of attention rewards outrage and certainty. The citizen is fed tailored indignation. Algorithms assemble us into micropublics that never share a front page. We lose a common world, the set of facts and frames we all at least know the others have seen. Without it, compromise sounds like betrayal and correction like censorship. 7. Inequality eroding equals citizenship. One person, one vote, and 100 unequal days between elections. Wealth buys time to navigate bureaucracies, experts to translate rules, alternatives, private schools, private security, private water, and insulation, gated communities, offshore addresses. The formal equality of ballots is sabotaged by the practical inequality of lives. Eventually, people notice. Eventually, they stop believing the oath that says the law sees them equally. 8. Technocracy as a moral habit. Let the experts handle it becomes a lullaby. Expertise is vital, but it drifts into policy without politics, models, cost-benefit charts, and evidence-based slides that smuggle value judgments as parameters. Citizens are asked to accept being subjects of competence. Those who resist are framed as anti-science. Meanwhile, the same expertise is quietly rented by the regulated. 9. Culture war as political economy's disguise. When redistributive fights are hard and donors are touchy, parties sell identity drama at scale. It delivers emotion while leaving the money flows intact. People learn to vote their anger while negotiating their rent in private. The rich keep their tax expenditures, the poor keep their enemies. 10. Apathy fertilized by cynicism. When outcomes repeatedly diverge from mandates or are credited to courts and agencies rather than to citizens, people retreat. Turnout dips, trust metrics droop, conspiracy merchants rent the vacant lot. A free society cannot run on suspicion. It must convert strangers into partners at least long enough to pave a street. 11. Platform rule as privatized constitution. Daily speech, association, and commerce now flow through terms of service. These private charters are enforceable at speed and at scale without due process. Liberal democracy outsourced town squares to firms whose incentives are engagement and revenue. We then feign surprise that our civic diet is salted with rage and fraud. 12. Emergency forever. Fear votes, fear signs. Security exceptions lengthen. Surveillance designed for enemies glances at citizens. The architecture of precaution becomes the architecture of life. A right that can be suspended indefinitely becomes etiquette. And yet, the liberal promise is worth keeping. The answer isn't a thicker ideology that tells everyone how to live. It's a thicker civics that teaches us how to live together. Rights need rituals, habits, and institutions that make us meet, argue, build, and repair in public. What would rights worthy of rights look like? Universal civic service with choice. A year or two, split half years, where every young citizen serves: schools, elder care, conservation, disaster response, local media, juries, paired with older adult sabbaticals to do the same. Not militarized conscription, civil work with stipends, training, and mixed cohorts. Shared service builds cross-class friendships and a practical education in pluralism. Deliberative assemblies as a standing practice. Randomly selected, demographically stratified citizens who spend weeks hearing opposing briefs on hard issues, then publish findings in plain speech. Not rubber stamps, civic juries that teach the country to think. Pair referenda and major bills with such reports so votes are framed by work, not advertising. Public financing and ad parity. Cap private money, match small donations, give every citizen a democracy voucher, enforce real-time disclosure, require equal ad access and source labeling in the season before elections. If influence is speech, then equalize microphones. Worker voice where we live most of our waking life. Co-determination in large firms, sectoral bargaining, portable benefits, and union rights for contractors. A person who cannot speak without risking rent is not a free citizen at 2 p.m. and an equal voter at 8 p.m. Platform obligations as civic utilities. Interoperability, algorithmic choice, due process standards for moderation, adversarial audits of recommender systems, data portability as a right. Treat dominant platforms as speech infrastructure with duties, not merely as shops. Rebuild social infrastructure. Libraries with maker spaces, parks with programming, clinics with community rooms, schools open after hours, places where strangers become familiar. Budget third places as seriously as roads. They are the roads of trust. Ease the vote. Deepen the meaning. Automatic registration, election holidays, mail-in options, but also civic holidays where we do something together besides vote. Town cleanups, remembrance days with joint projects, youth-led local audits. A schedule of belonging, not only a schedule of ballots. Teach civic arts, not just facts. Rhetoric, statistics, argument mapping, media forensics, local budgeting, community organizing. Graduating able to spot a bogus graph, chair a meeting, and write a public comment should be as basic as algebra. Constitutional maintenance with guardrails, scheduled amendment windows requiring cross-regional supermajorities, citizens' conventions convened by lot to propose, not impose, reforms. A living order must let itself be rewritten on purpose, not by drift and court alone. Duties that match our protections. Jury duty broadened to policy duty, transparency obligations for those who seek public money, a norm and perhaps a small tax credit for a baseline number of community hours each year. If we want a society of rights, we must be a people of care. There is also a personal discipline liberalism needs to survive its own success. Use rights to invite, not to withdraw. Free speech is not just the right to shout, it is the practice of answering with reasons. Freedom of association is not only forming safe circles, it is occasionally crossing circles on purpose. Privacy is not disappearing, it is choosing what to show and when, without shame. Learn to lose without humiliation and to win without revenge. If losers expect degradation, they will harden politics into a siege. If winners expect worship, they will provoke it. Practice the sentence, "We won fairly, you still belong here." Make your media diet civic, not narcotic. Read one outlet your friends hate, follow one voice you respect who disagrees with you. Schedule off-screen arguing with neighbors. Algorithms do not owe you wisdom. You owe yourself friction. Be local on purpose. National politics is better TV. Local politics is actual life. Know names at City Hall, serve on a board, demand receipts from the school, and praise it when they arrive. The nation is an abstraction built from these rooms. Critics will say, all this is earnest, but power is what matters. True. These rights are power building. They thicken the muscles liberalism needs, organization, empathy across lines, habits of argument that outlast moods, institutions that can say no to money without collapsing. They narrow the gap between formal equality and lived leverage. They turn a crowd into a public and a public into a partner worth governing with. The liberal ideal is not exhausted, it is under-practiced. Rights are the floor, not the furniture. Elections are the ignition, not the engine. Representation is the bridge, not the city. Without the rights that make us meet and work, the thinness of freedom invites thicker substitutes. Tribe, savior, myth. Those substitutes feel warm, they burn the house. Rights without rights is not an insult to liberty, it is a reminder to finish the sentence. Keep the freedoms broad. Then build the ceremonies of cooperation that teach us how to inhabit them together. Service that mixes us, assemblies that slow us into thinking, workplaces that hear us, platforms that don't farm us, schools that arm us with civic skill, spaces that hold us when we disagree. That is the only way the promise on paper becomes a life in common, where the law guards our dignity and our habits make it felt. Social democracy, velvet nets on a runaway train. Social democracy promises an adult compromise, keep markets for their energy, tame them for their harms. Let private risk chase innovation. Let public institutions catch people when the fall was not a choice. Bargain hard, tax fairly, insure widely, and no one has to be crushed just to make the graphs go up. The metaphor is comforting. A net stretched beneath a high wire, woven from unions, public schools, clinics, pensions, job protections, transit, and the simple decency of not letting a neighbor starve. But the wire is bolted to a train that will not slow. Perpetual growth, financialization, planetary heat, velvet nets, runaway train. Its first philosophical error is instrumental innocence, believing that cushioning a structure leaves its morals untouched. A wage insured against sickness is good. A life organized around selling hours to survive remains a bargain we never examined. Social democracy mutes the scream without asking why the room keeps producing it. It inherits capitalism's ontology, humans as inputs, nature as stock, time as yield, and hopes to correct the worst angles by redistributing at the end. It is triage with a conscience, not surgery with a plan. Second, it confuses provision with participation. Benefits arrive, dignity is assumed. But checks are not voices. People become clients of a benevolent machine, spoken for by professionals who mean well and often do well, while decisions remain elsewhere in boardrooms and ministries that count us as ratios. Paternalism wears friendly fonts. You are helped, yes. You are rarely invited. Third, it treats growth as absolution. The formula is elegant. Markets generate surplus, taxes skim, programs soothe, everyone smiles. When growth slows, the soothing shrinks. When it resumes, the soothing resumes. Morality rides business cycles. Few doctrines have trained so many decent people to speak so fluently about fiscal space and so clumsily about justice. From these premises grow predictable pathologies. 1. Means-tested labyrinths. To target help efficiently, we build cathedrals of paperwork. Prove your poverty every 6 months. Report your boyfriend's toothbrush. Disclose your humiliations to a stranger with a checklist. A benefit calibrated to the exact edge of need becomes a corridor of suspicion where those with the least time and literacy lose the most. Fraud becomes the public fable. Friction is the real policy. 2. Entitlements for the comfortable crowd out the desperate. Programs universal enough to win elections are defended most fiercely by those with the strongest voices. Middle-class tax expenditures, subsidized mortgages, tuition schemes that flatter legacy institutions. The poor receive lectures about incentives. The affluent receive instruments. Solidarity is proclaimed. Stratification is budgeted. 3. Unions as castles, not bridges. Labor power is essential, but the organized often defend insiders first. Permanent contracts protected while temp workers rotate. Industry deals that freeze ladders, public sector guilds that bargain for their own and let cleaners be outsourced. The language is standards. The effect is a two-tier society with the same flag. 4. Austerity as reflex, not remedy. When crisis arrives, often engineered elsewhere, the knife finds the softest tissue: libraries, buses, clinics, arts, local councils. Investment becomes spending. Prevention becomes nice to have. The same cities asked to absorb shocks are told to privatize water for discipline. Later, a museum wing is named after the man who bought the water. 5. Privatization in polite clothes. Outsourcing, public-private partnerships, contestability, vouchers. Words that turn public guarantees into revenue streams. The service survives as a brand while its bones are leased. Hospitals with philanthropy plaques and gig nurses. Schools with mission statements and temp teachers. Trains with logos and fewer mechanics. When outcomes sour, blame rotates, profit remains. Number 6, managerial morality. The ethic of social democracy slips into dashboards, KPIs for care homes, cost-benefit analyses for grief, randomized controlled trials to justify obvious decencies. Metrics matter, but the map becomes the meal. A politics that can say statistically significant more quickly than it can say enough slowly forgets why it started. 7. Debt anesthesia. Promises are paid with tomorrow. Municipalities borrow to keep pools open. Nations borrow to keep coal cheap. Students borrow to buy tickets into an economy that downsizes the theater. Debt is not a sin, but when it funds avoidance, it becomes a lullaby. Every lullaby ends when the interest rate wakes. 8. Green on brochures, gray in basements. The welfare state heats with old pipes. Retrofitting is postponed. Subsidies flatter tailpipes more than buses. Farmland is treated as offset. A politics that worships jobs cannot easily hear a planet that is not hiring. Meanwhile, floods close clinics and fires take forests that budgets assumed were infinite. Number 9, immigration as release valve, scapegoat as ritual. An aging population needs workers. A scared population needs a villain. Social democracy invites migrants and then underfunds welcome, stoking the very resentments it will later condemn from the podium. The welfare state is blamed for queues. The queue is blamed on the stranger. The stranger cleans the hospital. 10. Storylessness. Social democracy is superb at line items, hesitant at myth. It offers spreadsheets to souls, and souls, hungry for meaning, wander toward fiercer narratives. Nation purified, tribe redeemed, market worshipped. A politics that cannot tell a purpose beyond decency will eventually be outsung by those who can, even when those songs are cruel. And yet the net saved millions from hunger, cold, illiteracy, and despair. Its failure is not its existence. It is its timidity before the engines it tries to cushion. The alternative to cynical austerity is not naive largesse. It is structural courage, changing the rails, not merely handing out knee pads. What would that look like? Decommodify the basics. Health, housing, education, water, energy to cook and keep warm. Treat them as rights, not coupons. Universality beats means testing on both dignity and administration. When everyone is in, the upper middle class defends the service, and the bureaucracy can serve rather than sift. Guarantee power where people live their days. Co-determination in large firms, worker councils with veto power over mass layoffs, sectoral bargaining that sets floors across whole industries so decent employers aren't punished for decency. Add a right to exit, portable benefits, no non-competes, public options that make resignation survivable. Tax what concentrates power. Wealth, inheritances, windfall gains from natural resources, monopoly rents. Not as punishment, but as a hygiene measure against oligarchy. Close the exits that let the richest leave the community fiscally while living in it physically. Make administration merciful. Default to automaticity. If the state already knows your income, it pays your child benefit without forms. If the bank can move billions in milliseconds, it can disperse rent aid in days. Replace sanction-heavy compliance with audit-heavy fraud pursuit. Punish villains rather than design systems that assume everyone is one. Replace subsidy theater with ownership. Stop bribing firms to behave for a quarter. Build public capacity, municipal broadband, public development banks, green utilities, nonprofit drug manufacturing for essentials. Where private enterprise excels, partner. Where it exploits choke points, compete. A job guarantee for the useful work markets, ignore. Care, remediation, transit, insulation, boredom-curing civic projects. Let the state be employer of last resort at a living wage with training attached. Make unemployment a policy failure, not a household sentence. Pair with shorter standard hours so productivity gains feed life, not just margins. Metrics beyond GDP. Legislate dashboards that bind budgets to health, learning, carbon, biodiversity, time use, inequality. Tie cabinet bonuses to these outcomes the way firms tie executives to stock price. Numbers will not love us back, but we will stop pretending that the third decimal of growth absolves the first decimal of despair. A climate transition that feels like a pay rise. Free transit before you ban cars, heat pump grants that require no PhD, unionized green jobs where smokestacks used to be, dividends from carbon pricing paid quarterly to households, so the story of climate policy isn't your bill went up, but your life got better. Democratize the welfare state itself. Put clients on boards, open budgets to participatory processes. Establish citizens' assemblies to weigh trade-offs on pensions, zoning, long-term care. A system that decides for people will be resented. A system that decides with people will be defended. Confront financialization, not just its debris. Regulate leverage like a public hazard. Cap share buybacks when wages stagnate. Treat housing as a home first and asset second. Tax empty units, empower community land trusts, forbid predatory ownership structures for essential housing stock. There is also a moral reorientation. Social democracy must say aloud what it has too long implied. We do not redistribute pity, we redistribute power. Help that humiliates isn't help. Help that depends on good kings isn't justice. Replace charity with claim, client with citizen, efficiency with enough. And a cultural one. Tell a larger story than decency. Decency is the floor. The ceiling is a society where care is counted, where time is wealth, where work worth doing is what survives the spreadsheet, because we decided to keep it. Where dignity is not conditional on productivity, where belonging isn't a prize for successful consumers, but the default of being here, together. Self-tests for a social democracy that wants to stop failing gently. If growth halts tomorrow, which promises do you keep first? If the answer is the ones with the strongest lobbies, you have a safety net for the well-connected. How many signatures does a single mother need to feed her child using benefits she legally qualifies for? If the answer is more than 2, your compassion has an administrative accent. Can a nurse, a bus driver, and a teacher shape the budget without a donor? If not, your democracy is polite, not public. Velvet nets are better than bare concrete, but the aim cannot be to die more comfortably under the same machine. The aim is to slow the train, change its fuel, reroute its tracks, and sometimes decide not to ride today. Social democracy fails when it becomes a concierge for capitalism's moods. It succeeds when it becomes a constitution for human ends, strong enough to say no to appetites, wide enough to say yes to lives that are valuable even when they are not valuable to a quarterly report. Keep the nets. Make them universal, simple, dignified. Then lift your eyes from the safety gear to the engine room. If we will not touch the throttle, someone else will. Usually the sort of person who thinks people are cargo. Attached Marxist-Leninist communism, the plan that plans you. The dream begins with a wound you can count. A ledger where labor is cheap and profit is dear, palaces beside tenements, a machine that eats hands and pays in soot. The dream answers with arithmetic and ardor. If exploitation is engineered, justice can be engineered. Abolish private capital, centralize the levers, replace price with plan, owner with steward, competition with coordination. The whole economy becomes one firm, aimed not at dividends, but at human need. What generosity could do with a map and a will. It is a beautiful promise because it sounds like adulthood. No more wasteful rivalries, no more boom-bust fevers, no more lives tossed by prices set far away. We will add up our needs, add up our means, and lay the rails between them. The mills will hum to the rhythm of compassion. The party will be the conscience that scales. But somewhere between from each according to his ability and the first requisition order, the plan begins to plan you. The philosophy hardens into a moral machine with 3 fateful moves. First, historicism becomes certainty. History is not a field of surprises. It is a script with acts. Feudalism, capitalism, socialism, communism. In this grammar, opposition isn't merely mistaken. It is premature, unscientific, or class interest. Debate is downgraded to noise. Dissenters don't have arguments, they have class positions. Once the future is guaranteed by dialectic, the present must be herded into it. The map outranks the terrain. Second, the vanguard replaces the people. If the proletariat is the subject history, the party is its author. Ordinary workers, distracted by hunger and propaganda, cannot be trusted to persist toward utopia. They need a professional memory. Thus, a temporary dictatorship of those who know where history goes must act in their name. Temporaries do not expire easily. The guardians build gates. Third, ends sanctify instruments. If exploitation is structural, then any blow against the structure is moral. Coercion becomes surgery. Secrecy becomes hygiene. Collateral victims become objective enemies, whose suffering is billed to capitalism's account. The calculus is compassionate and cold, a million inconveniences for countless generations of equality. The plan keeps its halo, people lose their faces. From these premises, predictable pathologies flower. 1. The knowledge problem in moral costume. To plan an economy, you must know more than what people need. You must know what they will need, where, when, with what substitutions, under which tastes, with which local constraints. Markets, messy, impersonal, compress that information into prices. Planning tries to do the same with forms and committees. The forms always lie, not from malice, but from limits. Incentives to overstate, fear of blame, ignorance of downstream ripple effects. The result is a theater of accuracy, tables filled, quotas met on paper, masking shortages on the shelf and surpluses nobody wants. Plan fulfillment becomes a ritual, the ritual becomes reality, reality stands in line. 2. Incentives without honesty. When promotions, housing, and safety depend on meeting targets, you cannot meet honestly, you learn to meet them dishonestly. Inputs are relabeled to count twice, defects are hidden, numbers are massaged. The last week of every reporting period becomes a festival of truckloads moved to nowhere to become next month's inflows. The moral vocabulary remains for the people, but performance metrics teach a different grammar. Survival first, truth later. 3. The party as landlord of meaning. Centralization requires not just warehouses, but worldviews. Newspapers, schools, unions, courts, every institution that shapes a mind must harmonize with the plan. Diversity becomes noise. Critique becomes sabotage. Art performs sincerity. Science proceeds until it touches doctrine. The humanities are told what a human is. The social sciences are told how society moves. The citizen is told which doubts are dignified and which are deviant. 4. Surveillance as pastoral care. If the plan is benevolent and resistance harms the future, then watching is kindness. Files bloom. Informants are recruited through fear, zeal, envy, or boredom. The line between public and private erodes. A joke at a kitchen table can be a statistic tomorrow. Trust thins. Friendship becomes a careful sport. Children learn to edit sentences their mouths want to say. It is hard to build solidarity when every ear may be a ledger. 5. Scarcity spiritualized. Shortages are blamed on wreckers, saboteurs, droughts, encirclement, never on the system's own bottlenecks or blind spots. Citizens rebrand waiting as virtue. A queue becomes proof of commitment. The leadership praises sacrifice as if need were a policy and poverty a pedagogy. When famine arrives, it is reframed as a war against nature, enemies, or the past, so that death can be counted as discipline. 6. Nomenclatura and the new classes. A system designed to abolish class reproduces it with a different wardrobe. Access rather than ownership, privileges rather than deeds, better apartments, special stores, sanatoria, dachas, cars with lanes that part traffic like a myth. These are justified as lubricants of responsibility. Comrades must be rested to serve better. The old bourgeoisie is anatomized, a new one is denied. Resentment is managed with slogans and cues. 7. Purges as policy correction. Because errors accumulate and cannot be confessed, they are personified. A downturn, a failed harvest, an embarrassing exposure, none of these can be structural. They must be the fault of deviationists, rightists, leftists, saboteurs. The machine eats its engineers. Loyalty tests become more intricate than competence tests. Fear does what feedback would have done if feedback were allowed. 8. Black markets as shadow confession. Where the plan fails, the whisper economy appears. Barter, favors, bribes, shops behind shops. The state condemns them and depends on them. The citizen learns a second citizenship, the public self who applauds and the private self who hustles. The result is not hypocrisy so much as dual reality. The system knows it needs the leak and punishes the leaky for reminding it. 9. The withering that never comes. Classic doctrine promises the state will wither away once scarcity and conflict are gone. But a state skilled at rationing and surveillance does not melt. It metastasizes. Every crisis grows its jurisdiction. Even when crises recede, the habits they taught remain. A society that built muscles for control forgets how to move any other way. 10. Moral exhaustion. The vocabulary of nobility, people, comrades, justice, worn down by daily contradiction, becomes a noise citizens hear without meaning. Cynicism becomes the national education. You recite the hymn and roll your eyes. You honor the holiday and check the price of soap. A society that must perform virtue on schedule forgets how to recognize it in the wild. All of this can be said without romanticizing the order it tried to replace. Capitalism did and does indeed use hunger as a whip and profit as a compass. Liberal politics did and does domesticate oligarchs and call it liberty. The indictment of exploitation is real. The failure of the plan is not that it hated cruelty, it is that its cure was omniscience by appointment. Knowledge and goodness concentrated into a committee that was never allowed to be wrong in public. There are contemporary mutations that keep the grammar while switching fonts. Enterprise state capitalism borrows the language of planning, 5-year visions, national champions, strategic sectors, and welds it to markets staffed by loyalists. The plan is capitalized, dissent is regulated as misinformation. Algorithmic centralism dreams that data can do what commissariats could not. Sensors instead of informants, dashboards instead of dossiers, predictive policing instead of purges. The promise, plan without fear. The risk, precision without permission. A velvet surveillance that optimizes behavior while leaving choice as ceremony. Movement parties that speak for the people in the singular. Enemies named, press tamed, judges tutored, unions nationalized. The state becomes a mouth that never inhales. What then is salvageable from the dream without swallowing its machine? 1. Equality as a constitutional load-bearing wall. Not as envy, as design. Progressive taxation that bites into dynastic accumulation. Social floors that are universal and unconditional. Health, housing, education, clean water, heat. Antitrust that targets concentrations of power, not only price, public options where choke points breed moral blackmail, insulin, broadband, basic banking. These are not steps toward a single planner. They are guardrails against private planners. 2. Democracy at work, not just at the ballot. If most waking hours happen under command and control, parliaments cannot teach citizenship alone. Co-determination in large firms, worker councils with trigger rights over layoffs and relocations, sectoral bargaining that makes decency a floor, not a perk, portable benefits, bans on non-competes. No commissar needed, just the old idea that power should answer to those it uses. 3. Planning that confesses. We do need plans for climate, pandemics, grids, housing, but plans must argue in daylight, publish assumptions, run pilots, accept audit, and reverse course when the data punishes the dream. We were wrong should be a sentence the architect can say without exile. If a plan cannot survive humiliation, it will produce it. 4. Prices where they are good at telling truth, rules where prices lie. Let markets discover information in ordinary goods. Ban markets where they reliably produce catastrophe. Healthcare that rations by wallet, prisons that profit by bodies, data trades that harvest consent by confusion. Not everything needs a commissar or a coupon. Many things need a line you cannot cross. 5. Memory with teeth. Honor the dead of famines and prisons. Open archives. Teach what zeal can do to those it claims to love. But do not let memory become a prosecution of motive. Most people inside planned systems were trying to be good with the tools they were given. If you want a humane future, design it for the fallible, not for the angels the last century kept waiting for. There is also a spiritual correction. The plan failed because it tried to replace the slow, messy ethics of persuasion with a fast, clean ethics of coercion, for the right reasons it insisted. But human beings do not become equal by being arranged. They become equal by having their standing recognized even when they refuse the arrangement. A just order must tolerate being told no. The plan that cannot be refused is not a plan. It is a fate. Self-tests for the planner in you. Are you more in love with order than with the people the order is for? Can your preferred policy be opted out of without ruin? When the numbers sing, do you still listen for the voices the numbers always miss? If the answers lean the wrong way, your kindness wants a uniform. The most generous case for Marxist-Leninist communism is that it tried to bind power to compassion, a state that fights for the worker against the owner, for the sick against the invoice, for the hungry against the ledger. The tragedy is that it bound everything to that state: truth, bread, conscience, art. It made the plan so holy that changing it looked like sacrilege, and so fragile that reality had to be edited to let it live. In the end, the machine demanded more loyalty than it could afford and paid its debts with lives. Keep the ache that inspired it, keep the hatred of exploitation, keep the insistence that work without dignity is a crime and that wealth without responsibility is a theft with paperwork. Then add what the plan could not abide: pluralism, competition among ideas, institutions that forgive revision, rights that stop benevolence when benevolence forgets its manners. The future needs coordination, yes, but it needs conscience with veto power more. The plan that plans you is the secret name of every system that cannot admit surprise. The cure is not chaos, it is a polity that expects to be surprised and designs for it. Many centers, many paths, many ways to say this hurts without being told history requires it. A society like that may never be as tidy as the slogans promised. It will, however, be more human, which is what those slogans said they wanted all along. Fascism, ultra-nationalism, purity with steel boots. Fascism markets itself as cleansing. A nation sick with doubt and division will be washed, reborn, made one. It promises to solve the oldest human ache, fragmentation, by fusing millions into a single body. One will, one myth, one leader. The vocabulary is medicinal and martial at once, decadence diagnosed, enemies named, marching prescribed. But the cure is poison. Beneath the drums lies a philosophy that confuses identity with essence, disagreement with disease, force with truth, and death with meaning. At its core is the myth of palingenesis, national rebirth. Yesterday was humiliation, tomorrow will be glory. Today requires purification. Purity does not mean virtue, it means removal of the stranger, the critic, the cosmopolitan, the weak, the complicated fact. The dream claims to love the nation. In practice, it loves the nation only after subtracting most of what it actually is. Three conceptual moves power the machine. 1. The friend-enemy reduction. Politics is not deliberation. It is decision, us or them. Nuance is treason's accent. Institutions that slow decisions are declared decadent. Media that cross-examine are fifth columns. Courts that say no are anti-national. When the world is split cleanly, cruelty feels like hygiene. 2. The leader as living law. The people are pure in potential. The leader is their actuality. He feels the nation more perfectly than ballots can count. This is the Führerprinzip in any language. Not rule of law, but rule by a person whose will is framed as destiny. The crowd is told it is sovereign. In practice, it becomes a stage prop that roars on cue. 3. Aesthetics over ethics. Rallies, symbols, uniforms, salutes. The theater is not decoration, it is doctrine. Beauty is conscripted to make power look innocent. Violence is posed as sculpture. War becomes virility, executions, order, persecution, hygiene. If it looks magnificent, it is assumed to be right. From these moves grow predictable pathologies. Cult of grievance. Every failure is blamed upward or outward. The foreigner, the financier, the decadent, the intellectual, the sexual minority, the neighboring tribe. The narrative is narcotic because it heals shame without repair. Nothing is our fault except our mercy. Scapegoat economics. Jobs lost to automation or policy become theft by the other. Oligarchs are domesticated if they wave the flag. Unions are tolerated if they salute. Cartels are christened national champions. The actual economy is reorganized into crony corporatism. Profits privatized, risk nationalized, justification televised. Emergency as constitution. Crises, real or staged, become permanent. Temporary powers grow roots. Censorship, surveillance, indefinite detention, the right to designate enemies of the people at speed. When emergency is the norm, law is a costume, militarized masculinity. The ideal citizen is a uniform, disciplined, uncomplaining, obedient. Care is feminized and thus despised. Tenderness is labeled treachery. The family becomes a factory for soldiers. Women become altars and wombs. Gay citizens become punchlines or targets. Love that won't march is suspect. Mythologized history. The past is not studied, it is sculpted. Complexity is vandalized into parable. Atrocities vanish, defeats are explained by betrayal, victories are exaggerated into proof that destiny is on schedule. Memory becomes propaganda that votes. Truth by repetition. Facts are replaced by slogans with stamina. The big lie is not only a lie, it is a loyalty test. Can you repeat it without flinching? Those who refuse are identified for later. The press is either bought or branded enemy. Experts are praised when they kneel and purged when they measure. Violence as pedagogy. Street thugs are trial balloons for policy. Once the public acclimates to broken windows, the state formalizes the lesson. Violence teaches citizens the new grammar, who may touch whom, who must step aside, whose pain earns applause. Total mobilization of culture. Art becomes a mirror that flatters power. Universities become obedient schools. Religion is drafted as chaplain. The sacred is placed in uniform. God is told which flag to bless. Liturgy is edited for loyalty. Philosophically, fascism attempts to sacralize immanence, to make the nation itself divine, history a liturgy, the leader a priest without a higher altar to fear. It borrows just enough from philosophy to wear a mask. Nietzsche without self-overcoming, Schmidt without the dread that should restrain sovereign whim, Sorel without the humility to admit myth's danger. It is a plagiarism of depth to justify a politics of domination. Why do intelligent people fall for it? Because fascism solves four aches at once. The ache of humiliation by offering supremacy. The ache of loneliness by offering belonging. The ache of complexity by offering clarity. The ache of meaninglessness by offering sacrifice. It is a counterfeit sacrament. You are washed in enemies' tears. You belong because others are cast out. You see clearly because the picture is two-color. You matter because you might die for the leader's sentence. The costs are paid later, and by someone else first. Modern mutations wear new fonts. Networked ultra-nationalism. No need for a single party when you have synchronized subcultures, forums, channels, militias, influencer priests. The uniform is a meme. The rally is a live stream. The dog whistle is an algorithmic nudge. Leaderless does not mean harmless. It means deniable. Ecofascism. Ecology is repurposed into purity politics. The land must be saved from invaders, fertility controlled by myth, borders as sacred as forests. The planet's genuine crisis becomes a pretext to ration dignity by bloodline. Respectable authoritarianism. Courts kept but captured, elections held but tilted, newspapers open but bought, opponents free but bankrupt. The choreography mimics democracy while its bones are hollowed. Because boots are polished, many refuse to call them boots. The diaspora of conspiracy. Replacement, globalists, deep state, omnivorous myths that absorb every inconvenience into a single malevolent mind. Conspiracy theories are theology with the devil promoted to CEO. They bind the lonely with the glue of shared paranoia. How do you counter a politics that treats restraint as weakness and pluralism as cancer? Guardrails that do not beg. Non-derogable rights that majorities cannot vote away. Speech, assembly, press, bodily autonomy, equality before law. If the system can suspend them at will, fascism calls that a feature. Independent institutions with budgets and backbones, election administrators, inspectors general, auditors, public broadcasters that survive changes in government and prosecute friends as well as foes. Militant transparency, publish funding, contacts, lobbying, and conflicts in real time. Prosecute political violence as an attack on the constitutional order, not as clashes. Electoral systems that resist monopolies, proportional representation, ranked choice, fair maps, so that fear cannot easily snowball into one-party dusk. Civic immunization, media literacy, rhetoric, history of propaganda, local deliberative forums that teach disagreement without exile. Vaccines for the mind are slow to work, start early. A culture that starves fascism's appetite, belonging without enemies. Build third places, mixed service programs, unions that include rather than gatekeep, national projects that require cooperation across lines. If loneliness is treated privately, fascism treats it politically. Masculinity that protects rather than performs. Honor, care, and restraint, celebrate rescuers more than conquerors, make rites of passage about service, not domination. Meaning through work that matters. If the only way to feel necessary is to fight a domestic war, the politics has already failed. Fund visible, dignified, local work, care, climate, craft that ties identity to construction, not destruction. Humiliation repaired, not redirected. When regions or classes fall behind, respond with investment and attention, not lectures or mockery. Fascism is a revenge economy. Lower the demand for revenge. Lines to draw early. Language audits. When leaders call opponents vermin, diseases, or invaders, treat it as an emergency, not as color. Dehumanization is not the first step of genocide because someone wrote a manual. It is the first step because it makes the rest conceivable. Paramilitary zero tolerance, no winked-at uniforms, no community patrols, no fusion of party and police. Civilian monopoly on force is not negotiable. Emergency powers with fuses. If they must be used, they must expire rapidly and require rising supermajorities to renew. Men who love forever emergencies are telling you they do not love law. Personal tests. Do you want politics to humiliate someone? Then you want a spectacle, not a republic. Does your worldview require an enemy to feel alive? Then you are renting meaning from hatred. Do you find yourself enjoying the idea of violence against a domestic group? Then you have crossed the border that tyrants map for you. Do you cheer when a leader says only he can fix it? Then you are shopping for a father, not a constitution. Some will object, isn't this just passion for country? No, patriotism loves a people enough to tell them the truth. Nationalism loves a story enough to kill the people who complicate it. Patriotism wants more citizens, fascism wants fewer. Patriotism protects institutions that limit its own leaders. Fascism mocks those institutions until only the leader remains. Others will say, but liberalism is weak, only iron can meet iron. The answer is not softness, it is spine with law. Build a state that arrests thugs because it is lawful, not because it is angry. Build a culture that honors sacrifice for neighbors, not against scapegoats. Build an economy that grants dignity without uniforms. Strength that does not need a myth is strong enough. Fascism sells a shortcut to transcendence. You can matter immediately if you merge with something that hates. It is a spiritual temptation disguised as a political program. The antidote is older and harder, meaning without enemies, pride without lies, unity without uniformity, courage without cruelty. None of that looks as cinematic as a rally at dusk. It looks like courts that work, papers that print, neighbors who argue and then share a fence, schools that teach the worst chapters without excuse, a military that salutes constitutions more than men, a civil service that enforces boring rules, a culture that applauds the person who plants a tree where a statue used to stand. Purity with steel boots ends always in a march toward a cliff, beautifully filmed, ardently cheered, perfectly timed. The art is good, the ethics are ash. The nation that refuses this path will look quieter by comparison. That is the point. Freedom's music is not a drumline. It is a long rehearsal where everyone gets a part, even the difficult instruments, even the ones who came late and read from different scores. Keep the band, ignore the boots. Tap, military junta stratocracy, the barracks republic. A uniform looks like certainty stitched into cloth. Boots thud in unison, orders travel cleanly, outcomes are immediate. Where civilians bicker and delay, soldiers move. The pitch of a military regime writes itself. Corruption will be punished, chaos will be quieted, borders will be guarded, roads will be paved. We will not rule, the officers say, we will restore. But barracks are excellent at producing obedience, logistics, and courage in extremis. They are poor at cultivating the habits that keep freedom alive. Ambiguity tolerated, disagreement ritualized, failure inspected, and power asked to show its math. Under the junta, a nation is invited to live as a garrison, tidy, tense, and unable to breathe unless the commander says so. At the heart of stratocracy is a moral substitution, discipline for deliberation. In war, hesitation kills. In politics, hesitation is often wisdom. A soldier's virtues, loyalty, cohesion, decisiveness, are real and precious in their proper domain. Transposed onto the whole of civic life, they become vices. Loyalty becomes omerta, cohesion becomes conformity, decisiveness becomes impatience with law. The chain of command is a miracle for battle. As a constitution, it is a shortcut that ends in a cul-de-sac. Junta logic rests on three flattering premises. 1. The nation is a perpetual emergency. Civilian mess is rebranded as mortal peril. Budget debates become supply lines, strikes sabotage, journalism psyops. When everything is critical, nothing may be questioned. Temporary measures acquire birthdays. 2. Purity lives in the barracks. Politicians are corrupt, parties tribal, courts captured. Soldiers, by contrast, are clean, tested by danger, inoculated by sacrifice. This mythology ignores procurement graft, factionalism in officer corps, and the iron law that power without audit soils any uniform. 3. Unity is efficiency, dissent a leak. Statecraft is framed as a logistics problem. Identify threats, align resources, execute. Citizens become terrain to be secured. Complexity becomes camouflage for subversion. A plan that would save a convoy is imposed on a culture. Out of these premises grow predictable pathologies. Emergency as constitution. Decrees replace debates, curfews replace campaigns, tribunals replace trials. Because emergencies justify themselves by speed, results become the only language allowed. If the trains run and bullets stop, who needs rights? You wake up one year to find that the only institution without sunset clauses is the general staff. Citizens recast as suspects. Counterinsurgency doctrine moves home. Neighborhoods are mapped as zones. Unions, student groups, religious minorities, and journalists are cataloged by threat profile. Preventive detention becomes housekeeping. The internal enemy is a category spacious enough to hold anyone who delays the commander's calendar. Parallel justice. Military courts try civilians for reasons of national security. Evidence is secret. Defense counsel constrained, verdicts brisk. The rule of law becomes a dress uniform, ornamental, unbothered by sweat. When you erect a second justice system beside the first is the one that withers. Budgetary black holes. Defense accounts go opaque. Procurement becomes a feast for intermediaries. Offsets are patriotic euphemisms for kickbacks. Strategic industries are awarded to cousins in neat suits. The armed forces enter business, cement, telecoms, tourism, until the state is both the referee and the star striker. Criticize the conglomerate and you weaken morale. Crony command. Merit is loudly praised and quietly bypassed. Promotions reward loyalty to personalities. Doctrine yields to palace politics. Intelligence becomes a courier for the leader's anxieties. Professionals who warn are rotated out. Enthusiasts who echo are rotated up. Unity of command is redefined as unity of applause. Militarized masculinity. Obedience is gendered as virtue. Care is feminized as weakness. Teachers are told to drill, nurses to obey, artists to inspire. Boys are taught that tears are treason, girls that wombs are barracks for the future. Families become recruitment offices, tenderness, a suspect pastime. Economy as parade ground. Industrial policy is conducted like a campaign. Announce an objective, seize assets, issue quotas, punish underperformance. Sometimes it works for a season. Ports clear, inflation dips, roads appear. Over time, fear erases feedback. Factories report victories that exist on paper. Farms meet targets by counting next year's harvest early. The graph salutes, the pantry doesn't. Border theater and patriotic staging. When legitimacy wobbles, a skirmish is handy. Maps brighten at the edges, rhetoric hardens. Dissenters are called foreign mouths. Even without real war posture fills the news, parades, exercises, procurement unveilings. The regime borrows time from tomorrow at interest rates set by funerals. Silence sold as stability. Kidnappings become removals, torture enhanced interrogation, disappearances administrative. A portion of the population learns to live at lower volume. Another portion learns to write reports with verbs that do not exist. When this quiet is praised abroad as order, the junta smiles. It has turned fear into foreign policy. Epistemic burn. Garrisons produce action beats. Clear, loud, final. Reality does not. Public health, schooling, climate, housing, these require patience, error bars, boring meetings. The military style cannot metabolize them. The result is a tempo mismatch. Problems that need iterations get commands, commands produce theater, theater consumes truth. Eventually, the regime governs a map whose symbols are immaculate and a country whose potholes are not. Why then is the barracks republic seductive even to people who should know better? Because it cures for a time 4 anxieties. Fear of disorder. Sirens quiet, streets look neat. The nightly news features uniforms instead of yelling lawmakers. Disgust with corruption. A few vivid arrests, sometimes of yesterday's allies, advertise a new broom. The old thieves are punished, the new ones have better hymns. Exhaustion with talk. Endless hearings are replaced by a man at a lectern. If you mistake conversation for cowardice, you will mistake command for competence. Hunger for meaning. War words lend moral contour to daily life. Sacrifice acquires a script. Success, a salute. The price for these anesthetics is a damaged civic nervous system. Once the army learns it can arbitrate politics, politics orients around the army. Factions seek patrons among generals. Budgets are written with one eye on rank. Universities train as if for a perpetual officer interview. Even when the uniforms return to barracks, Praetorian muscle memory remains. Politicians govern like colonels and citizens argue like quartermasters. About supplies, not principles. Modern mutations make the junta respectable. Caretaker costumes. The regime holds elections it calibrates. Courts exist but are intimidated. Journalists print but only to the edge of the red line. Business travelers approve of the airport. The uniform smiles in press photos with investors. Stability becomes the premium the world pays to look away. Deep state drift. No formal coup occurs. Instead, intelligence services, internal security, and senior officers hold a quiet veto. Dossiers surface at key moments. Ministers are reminded gently of their visas. National security reviews slow undesired reforms until the calendar kills them. The ballot survives. Sovereignty is elsewhere. Hybrid militias. The state tolerates or sponsors patriotic groups that do useful violence the law cannot sign. Later, some are absorbed into official structures. Others remain convenient thrashers. Everyone learns the lesson. Authority is a spectrum, and the most enthusiastic goons are rewarded with badges. Contracted coercion. Private military companies and security firms extend Stratocracy past its legal skin. The flag is optional, the paycheck is not. Accountability is outsourced, atrocities are invoice items. The junta keeps its hands manicured, the work gets done. How do you inoculate a republic against its barracks? Civilian supremacy, designed, not declared. Constitutional clarity. Put the military's mission in text, external defense, period. Bar active duty officers from civilian posts, require years of cooling off before they can serve in politics or governorships. Make a coup a specific crime with no statute of limitations. Budget daylight. Defense accounts audited by independent bodies with security-cleared staff, public summaries by category, procurement published with bidders, timelines, penalties. If a weapon needs secrecy, its purchase doesn't. No businesses in uniform. Divest military-owned enterprises. Forbid new ones. Pay officers well. Ban side empires. A colonel who runs a cement company is not just a conflict of interest. He is a coup incubator. Chain of accountability. Create inspectorates general inside the services that report to Parliament as well as to the Chief of Staff. Whistleblower protection with teeth for listed personnel. Policing demilitarized. Train and equip police for community safety, not war. Merge elite police units back into accountable structures. Ban military hardware from routine patrol. Separate intelligence from public order. If every problem looks like a war, the solution will be a wound. Justice that can look a general in the eye. No military courts for civilians, ever. Universal jurisdiction for torture and disappearances. Name the crimes, archive the names. Refuse amnesia disguised as reconciliation. Truth commissions with subpoena power. Not to humiliate the rank and file, but to map the machinery so it cannot be rebuilt in a new color. Culture that honors service while starving worship. Rituals of gratitude without political choreography. Parades for veterans, not for governments. Memorial days that mourn all victims of political violence, not only those in uniform. Civic service that isn't military. A parallel right for building, caring, restoring, so that belonging does not require boots. Education in civilian virtues. Teach officers constitutional law and the ethics of restraint. Teach civilians how armies work so that reverence is replaced by respect. Guardrails against the emergency drug. Hard sunsets. Emergency powers expire automatically and require supermajorities to renew, with raised thresholds each time. Independent disaster agencies. Build competence outside the chain of command so that floods, fires, and plagues do not become excuses to salute. Legislative triggers. Any declaration of internal enemy must be reviewed within days. Failure to vote voids it. Economy that does not need khaki to function. Transparent public works. Let roads and ports be built by audited agencies. Let the army help only in narrow, time-bound roles. Diversify the growth story. Regions that depend on garrisons become clients. Invest so that towns have livelihoods that do not require a checkpoint. There is also a personal discipline because every junta begins in someone's private wish. Beware the pleasure of humiliation. If you want politics to punish and parade your adversaries, you do not want a republic. You want a drill field. Learn to live with slow. If slowness enrages you more than cruelty does, you are available for conscription by anyone who promises speed. Practice disagreement without excommunication. The more you can hold a neighbor's face and a contrary fact in the same view, the less likely you are to cheer when faces are covered and facts are forbidden. Defenders of the barracks republic will say, "But it works. Streets are safe." Sometimes they will be right, briefly. Authoritarian competence can clear a square. The bill arrives later, itemized as sclerosis, cowardice, and secrets. Institutions unable to correct themselves because correction looks like defiance. Elites trained to wait for orders, citizens practiced only in silence or explosion. A nation becomes agile at obedience and clumsy at everything else. The paradox is cruel. Soldiers are most needed when politics has failed, and military rule guarantees that politics will fail again. The uniform is noble when it protects a constitution. It is tragic when it becomes one. A healthy country teaches its army to fight and then teaches it to stop. It funds courage at the front and humility at home. It demands that officers be proud of refusing illegal commands and proudest when they never receive them. The Barracks Republic promises clean lines and full schedules. It delivers frightened nights and histories written in passive voice. If you crave the comfort of cadence, go to a parade. When you turn for government, ask for something messier, a chamber that argues, a court that interrupts, a press that irritates, a police force that greets, a budget you can read, an officer who salutes the ballot instead of the balcony. That is the only security worth its cost. Order that can survive being questioned because it remembers it was built to be. Technocracy, spreadsheet souls, human costs. Technocracy sells a comforting upgrade to politics, trades slogans for spreadsheets, faction for fact, opinion for what the evidence shows. Let the people set the goals, the experts will get us there efficiently. On this pitch deck, mistakes look like rounding errors, virtue looks like optimization. The stadium cheers for competence, the field fills with modelers. But under the clean lines lurk old failures with new fonts. Power hidden inside parameters, values smuggled in as variables, and human beings reduced to rows that behave only if they average out. Its first error is metaphysical and wears a lab coat, confusing measurement with meaning. What we can count begins to masquerade as what counts. A dashboard becomes a doctrine. A key performance indicator becomes a key moral indicator. Health is compressed to qualies, learning to test scores, safety to incidents per 100,000. Goodhart's law obliges. Once a measure becomes a target, it stops measuring. Schools learn to teach the metric, hospitals learn to code the patient, police learn to define crime downward. The world rearranges itself to look good on the report. Second, technocracy mistakes a model for the world and then punishes the world for disobeying. Every model has assumptions about behavior, substitution, risk, time preference, spillovers, the invisible theology that tells the equations who deserves to matter and when. Set the discount rate high, and the future becomes a rumor. Build representative agents, and the outlier, often a poor person, becomes a rounding error. Pretend uncertainty is merely variance, and you will break things that do not forgive. The Monte Carlo says, probably fine. The river later says otherwise. Third, technocracy confuses neutrality with nobility. Evidence-based policy sounds like politics without politics, but evidence never tells you what to maximize. It tells you what happens when you try. Choosing the objective function is a moral act. Is the goal to minimize total harm, to protect the worst off, to uphold rights even when costly, to honor consent even when inefficient? These are not questions an RCT can answer. When experts act as if they can, democracy becomes a customer service desk for decisions already made in a spreadsheet. From these errors grow predictable pathologies. 1. Optimization without permission. Nudges, defaults, friction, small levers move big populations. Many help. Organ donation soars with opt-out. Savings rise with auto-enroll. But paternalism scales quickly. The city encourages desired behaviors by making undesired ones inconvenient. The citizen experiences a maze designed by someone who calls them users. Consent blurs into click wrap. You agreed to the policy the way you agreed to the terms of a phone. 2. KPI morality. What gets funded is what fits on a slide. Preventable deaths per dollar, countable. Loneliness, humiliation, trust, budgetarily invisible. Agencies learn to prioritize problems that produce tidy numerators and denominators. A policy that looks great in aggregate can be a cruelty in distribution. Averages hide victims with names. When the target is met, the mission is declared complete, and the person who didn't fit the target learns the difference between success and care. 3. Black boxes with badges. Credit scores, risk assessments, welfare fraud detectors, predictive policing, hiring filters. Algorithms become gatekeepers to life chances. Bias data trains neutral code. Proxies stand in for protected traits. Error rates bite the already exposed. When asked to explain, the system says proprietary. When challenged in court, it says complex. The wrong person is denied the loan, the bail, the benefit, and the appeal is a help article. 4. Revolving door expertise. The same consultants who write the methodology sell the fix. The same firms that lobby for a standard sit on the committee that defines it. Stakeholder process becomes a synonym for people with access. The public appears in the footnotes as externalities, and the externalities are often neighborhoods that do not pay retainers. 5. Post-politics as elite comfort. Technocracy promises to cleanse debate of heat. In practice, it often moves debate to venues most citizens can't enter. Regulatory dockets, standards bodies, internal guidance memos. Elected officials point to the white paper. The white paper points to best practice. Everyone points past the people who live with the consequences. 6. Emergency as epistemology. In crisis, plague, flood, grid collapse, experts must speak fast. But the habit lingers. Trust the science becomes a cudgel that confuses science, a method that argues with itself with the science, a consensus with a press office. Dissent that improves models is labeled heresy. Trade-offs that belong to citizens are decided in labs. The public learns suspicion. Conspiracy merchants sell counterfeit transparency. 7. Seeing like a dashboard, breaking like a life. Top-down schemes flatten local knowledge. A forest becomes board feet. A city becomes traffic flow. A clinic becomes throughput. The tacit, craft, custom dignity does not port to CSV. Programs arrive elegant and fail embarrassingly. The postmortem discovers wisdom that could have been invited if only the plan had ears. 8. Time theft by optimization. Any system tuned to remove waste tends to remove slack, those buffers where resilience lives. Hospitals run lean, then panic. Supply chains run just in time, then snap. Classrooms cram content, then forget childhood. Efficiency triumphs right up to the moment a surprise asks for a margin. 9. Moral outsourcing by leaders. According to the model, becomes a way to speak without owning the pain. When a choice hurts, leaders point to a curve. Tools become shields. The public stops hearing a voice willing to say, this is the value we chose, this is who pays, this is why we'll revisit it if we are wrong. Modern mutations are simply more precise. AI technocracy. Recommender systems shape attention. Foundation models write the first draft of judgment. Safety teams hold the keys to silence. Compute replaces committees. A handful of labs define the feasible and call it fate. Smart city paternalism. Sensors everywhere, consent nowhere. Dynamic pricing for roads and heat that prices out the poor first. Risk scores for neighborhoods that read like old redlining with smoother fonts. Social scoring, soft edition. Not one government score, but dozens, insurance, platforms, landlords, stitched into a shadow passport. You can go anywhere, so long as every private gate agrees. And yet, expertise is not the enemy. We want bridges that stand, planes that land, vaccines that work, grids that balance. The problem is not knowledge, it is rule by those who hold it without answerability to those who live it. The cure is not anti-intellectualism, it is humility by design. What would humility look like in a governing machine? Show your math, always. Publish model code, data provenance, confidence intervals, and most of all, the value choices, discount rates, fairness definitions, thresholds that trade false positives for false negatives. Make a one-page we chose X over Y because Z for civilians, not just a 200-page appendix for peers. Separate facts from aims. Require every major policy to state A, the empirical claim, if we do A, B will likely happen. B, the normative aim, we prefer reducing harm to the worst off over maximizing totals. And C, the uncertainty. Here is what we don't know that could flip the decision. Vote on B, audit A, treat C as a reason for reversible designs. Rights that metrics cannot overrule. No algorithmic veto on due process, housing, health, or speech. If a model touches a right, it must be contestable by a human with authority to say, approved anyway, and that decision must be logged and learnable without career suicide. Deliberative companions to expertise. Pair big decisions with citizens' assemblies that hear adversarial briefings, inspect assumptions, and publish guidance in plain language that elected officials must publicly accept or reject with reasons. Experts supply the map, the public chooses the destination. Red teams and sunset clauses. Institutionalize adversaries. Before deployment, hostile audits. After deployment, scheduled break glass reviews that can kill a tool without the permission of the team that built it. No permanent algorithms, no permanent emergencies. Opt-outs and pilots. Where feasible, allow individuals or municipalities to choose a regulated alternative to the optimized default. Start small, compare variance, publish harms. A policy that cannot survive controlled pluralism is not fit to govern a plural people. Procurement with teeth. Ban black box systems in core public functions, require escrowed code, interpretability standards, bias audits, and public interest APIs. Proprietary stops at the courthouse door. Slack as policy. Mandate resilience margins, beds per capita, days of PPE, transformer spares, classroom aids, funded like insurance, reported like deficits. Penalize leaders who boast of leanness and then beg when variance visits. Pay for the immeasurable. Tie budgets to boring goods. Trust, continuity, time. For example, staffing ratios in care homes, guaranteed face-to-face time in clinics, stable teacher assignments. If dignity won't fit a KPI, legislate it as a floor. Teach the public how models lie. Civic curricula in statistics, causal inference, rhetoric, and the history of expert failure. The point is not to sneer at experts, it is to give citizens the tools to argue with love. There is also a discipline for experts themselves. Speak in verbs and verbs of ownership. We chose, not the data showed. Confess uncertainty before you are forced. Error correct in public. Treat reversals as promotions for truth, not demotions for pride. Spend time where your numbers misbehave. Clinics, classrooms, shop floors, street corners. Models get smarter when their makers get embarrassed. And a discipline for citizens. Ask every time, what is the objective function? If the answer is a number, ask whose life it forgot to price. Distinguish science from policy. What is can be tested. What matters must be argued. Reserve the right to be inefficient for the sake of being human. to keep a post office that loses money but binds a town, to fund art that offends accountants, to give a person a second chance when the model says unlikely. The best case for technocracy is that it tries to make harm visible. The worst case is that it makes only certain harms visible and then pretends the rest are stories. But pain that doesn't fit a cell still hurts. Wisdom is a hybrid craft, reason in service of ends that reason cannot author, expertise inside institutions that can be told no, optimization that refuses to sacrifice the person to the plan. Spreadsheet souls is not an insult to math, it is a warning to memory. We are not averages. We are brittle, particular, surprising. A politics that remembers this will use models as flashlights, not skylights. It will let experts drive in storms and then return the keys. It will fund slack, honor the uncounted, and insist that every equation carry, in its margin, the face of someone who will never see the report but will live with what it decides. Got it? We're already at the end. Here's the final script revised to 10,000 characters. Tash, libertarian minimal state, freedom without fire exits. The minimal state sells a fierce, elegant promise. No one bosses you around. The law restrains force and fraud, protects property and contracts, defends borders. Otherwise, live and let live. Consent is the secular sacrament, the market its liturgy, and the night watchman state the usher who keeps the aisles clear. The rule is simple. What isn't aggression is permitted. Fewer laws, more liberty. Fewer plans, more spontaneity. Fewer taxes, more responsibility. It sounds like adulthood. Don't hit, don't steal, don't lie, then be free. But a society isn't an empty room where strangers trade. It's a building where we share walls, water, air, streets, signals, pathogens, and power. Freedom without fire exits assumes the flames won't come, or that if they do, the invisible hand will invent stairs while the smoke thickens. The problem isn't love of liberty. It's thinness. A thin idea of coercion, a thin idea of property, a thin idea of consent. Coercion, narrowly read. Libertarianism is superb at spotting the fist or the jail. It's weaker with structural coercion, offers that can't be refused because background conditions make refusal ruinous. Work or starve, sign or be evicted, click agree or be disconnected from modern life. All wear the mask of choice. If freedom means meaningful alternatives, then desperation is a kind of gun you hold to yourself. Property without a prologue. Don't steal presumes it's clear what's yours. Yet titles often descend from enclosure, conquest, or statute. Even when cleanly acquired, ownership of non-replicable essentials, land, water sources, spectrum, dominant platforms, confers leverage over others' options. Property is real. So is the community's stake in the conditions that make property valuable: courts, roads, education, clean air, a stable climate. Consent without capacity. A signature between unequals can be surrender with paperwork. Consent is meaningful when people have time, counsel, literacy, health, and viable alternatives. Otherwise, a contract distributes risk upward and pain downward while the law blesses the ink. From these thinnesses, familiar failures follow. Public goods without publics. Markets underprovide things we all need, but none can buy alone. Basic research, epidemic preparedness, flood control, maintained pipes and bridges. Philanthropy and local heroics help until the flood is larger than the donor list. Even watchmen need roofs somebody paid for together. Externalities renamed preferences. If gasoline's price ignores the cost of your exhaust to my lungs, the price is a polite lie. Torts after the fact can't repair diffuse, delayed, or irreversible harms. Aquifers, pandemics, climate. Prevention beats litigation where the damage outruns the docket. Monopoly as contract. Free entry disciplines firms on chalkboards. In the wild, network effects, switching costs, and control of infrastructure concentrate power. When the road to customers runs through one platform, if you don't like it, leave is a joke. Exit is a right only when it's affordable. Opportunity with tolls. When housing, healthcare, transit, and schooling are pure commodities, freedom becomes a subscription. The poor buy inferior versions or go without. The rich buy insulation. Equal ballots coexist with unequal access to the conditions that make ballots usable. Patchwork justice. Arbitration clauses, NDAs, private security with quasi-police powers. Private law proliferates. The affluent get bespoke dispute resolution, the poor get crowded dockets. The state enforces the contracts that built this private constitution and calls it neutrality. Neutrality that ratifies unequal leverage is deference. Crisis with a coin jar. Plague, fire, famine, and the GoFundMe. Mutual aid blossoms, institutions are absent. A minimal state is a paradoxical optimist. It assumes strangers will perform miracles in emergencies while assuming they can't be trusted to plan together in peacetime. Local tyrannies. Dismantle centralized power and smaller powers fill the space. HOAs that zone out the poor, company towns with corporate cops, clan or church orders that rule by ostracism. Exit isn't relief when every nearby room is owned by a cousin of the same landlord. Paternalism in disguise. Markets nudge, addict, and addict again. Dark patterns, exploitive credit, gamble loops, nicotine plus algorithm attention economies. Caveat emptor meets PhD persuasion. Education helps. Asymmetry of design power usually wins. Modern mutations update the costume. Anarcho-capitalist enclaves promise frictionless freedom, private police, private courts, private utilities, until the servants of freedom discover there's no ballot for the rulebook. Crypto constitutions preach code is law until code fails and founders improvise sovereignty on a call. Platform libertarianism hands daily speech and trade to terms of service. The exit button says delete account, not keep voice. To be fair, libertarianism spots real rot, rent-seeking, overcriminalization, censorship, capture. It reminds us that permissionless creativity lifts lives, that the state can be clumsy or cruel, that laws can criminalize harmless life. Keep that fire, but wire the building. Freedom with fire exits looks like this. 1. A wider lens on non-aggression. Treat predictable non-consensual harms as coercion worth stopping in advance. Pollution, data extraction that cannot be reasonably refused. Predatory design. Use standards and liability by design when ex-post remedies can't reach the victims. 2. Capabilities as floors, not choreography. Guarantee basics that turn paper liberty into usable liberty. Clean water, vaccinations, and primary care. A roof that keeps rain out. Primary, secondary education. Minimum income support when work is unavailable. Open transit. Make them universal to avoid humiliation. Simple to avoid bureaucracy. Portable so exit is real. These are exits and sprinklers, not velvet ropes. 3. Property with stewardship. Tie ownership to dudes where assets sit on shared conditions. Land with environmental obligations, housing with habitability and anti-vacancy, spectrum with non-discrimination, dominant data holders with fiduciary duties to users. 4. Competition as a liberty right. Antitrust that targets power, not just prices. Ban non-competes that shackle workers. Mandate interoperability and portability so leaving doesn't mean silence. Scrutinize mergers for democracy harm. Media gatekeepers, not only consumer harm. 5. Consent that means capacity. Ban one-sided arbitration in essential services. Require plain language terms. Outlaw deceptive design. Give people and classes of people standing in fee shifting to challenge abuse. A checkbox isn't a conscience. 6. Catastrophe insurance as civilization's premium. Stockpile, drill, and build redundancy for pandemics, floods, fires, grid failures, cyber attacks. Markets don't keep inventory for unpriceable events. Polities must. Call it freedom's deductible. 7. Lean state, thick civil society. Keep agencies small but competent, transparent by default, and service-oriented. Fund unions, co-ops, mutual aid groups, libraries, parks, places that convert strangers into neighbors. Minimal government without rich association breeds loneliness. Lonely people rent meaning from demagogues. 8. Decriminalize the victimless, prioritize the harmful. Shrink criminal law to what truly injures others. Replace prison with fines or treatment where possible. Expunge records so agency returns. The night watchman should watch for wolves, not for the smell of different lives. 9. Freedom tech. Public digital infrastructure with privacy by default, identities you control, open protocols for social media, due process standards for algorithmic decisions, right to explanation that actually explains, a real exit button. 10. Tax power, not hustle. Simplify, close evasion arteries, target rents, monopoly profits, land value, resource extraction, inheritances, fund the floors and the fire exits, not micromanagement. 11. Democratic guardrails that don't sprawl. Independent courts, rights majorities can't vote away, sunset clauses that force re-argument, lawmakers who must show their math, citizens' assemblies that put lay judgment beside expertise. Limited government doesn't mean weak institutions, it means answerable ones. There's a temperament to borrow both ways. From libertarians, suspicion of euphemisms that hide force, impatience with red tape that makes poverty illegal, the habit of asking compared to what. To libertarians, suspicion of euphemisms that hide private sovereignty can inhabit the habit of asking, whose choice is this, really? When hunger negotiates, impatience with theories that treat disasters as teachable moments for the unlucky. Self-test for freedom that survives weather. If your model of liberty needs the poor to be lecture-proof rather than hunger-proof, your liberty is decorative. If your answer to monopoly is start a competitor while the monopolist sets the toll, you've confused pep talk with policy. If your solution to pandemics is let the responsible sort themselves, you turned breath into a luxury good. If every restraint on a firm is coercion, but every restraint imposed by indispensability is choice, you've built a theology of private crowns. Libertarian minimalism is best when it rebels against domination by paperwork, sermon, or party. It is worst when it denies domination by circumstance and scale. Humans are not only shoppers. We are builders and inheritors of shared conditions that can't be purchased one at a time. Some goods wither when sold, some harms scatter when billed. So keep the fire of liberty hot. Burn out graft, end victimless crimes, protect speech that offends fashions, clear the path for weird builders. Then install sprinklers. Mark the exits, store ladders on every floor. Freedom worth having is freedom that survives bad luck, bad actors, and bad weather. A minimal state that refuses that preparation sells bravery at a discount to those least able to pay. A free society with fire exits asks for courage where it belongs, in choices, while refusing to outsource survival to luck and slogans.